Amanda was experiencing the very real state of dread of a clean slate, even though she was neither a writer nor a journalist. Tomorrow, she was starting a new life and a new job with accommodation. The employer is a wealthy, powerful businessman who clearly doesn't know his capital account. Without further ado, he made his conditions to her over the phone. I need a carer with a degree in psychotherapy to be near my daughter 24/0 hours a day. I have a comfortable country house with excellent living conditions. You will be completely comfortable, but for the 3 months of your probationary period, you will not get a single day off. A generous salary will compensate you for this temporary inconvenience. And the man, who called himself Carl, quoted her fee so much that Amanda's legs gave out. Her monthly income would be the equivalent of her hospital salary for the year with all bonuses and fringe benefits. They agreed that she would start her duties in 3 days. During this time, she would gather all the personal belongings she needed and select the necessary medical devices for the patient's sessions. She will then be authorized to make a list of anything else she may need in her work. A car will pick you up at your front door at 800 hours sharp. The driver's name is Andrew. Send me your home address to this number. Carl pronounced the words sharply and clearly as if he were minting coins. Amanda even thought that every minute of this man, apparently, is worth both silver and gold. Too businesslike. But it even appealed to her. She didn't respect the soreness and gruel in his speeches. She judged people by their actions, not by their sweet voice. She knew in her 26 years that time puts everything in its place and stigmatizes characters. Who's worth what? Here she is, Amanda herself, a psychotherapist with a red diploma, the beauty and pride of the faculty, the hope of the department. At school, all lightweight and character girlfriends on discos and bars in high school fluttered. She crammed a place in the medical university on the budget, partially guaranteed only a gold medal. The support should have been passed on excellent final exams. There was no money for a serious education in the family of Max, a plumber, and his wife, Idaka, who worked in a bakery as a saleswoman. No, her parents were not some marginalized individuals. Father even drank. Only on holidays, did not complain of this bad habit, and with men colleagues, every paycheck did not cheat. He came from a remote, abandoned village and ended up in the city when clever businessmen bought out all the agriculture in his small homeland for the farming kingdom. A kind of holding there now appeared with dairy and meat processing plant of a new format with technological lines of the most innovative kind. Max was called to work there, but he held a grudge against the new owners, that they almost uprooted the pogost on the outskirts, where his and his wife Ida's parents were buried, that the village was torn down to nothing, turned into ashes, ruins, an archaeological monument of their former life inwardly. He knew it was just as well. The population in their village was finally getting drunk. There was no work. Everyone was leaving for the city in droves. Only he and Ida held on to their hut and 10 acres of land, but then they gave up too. Amandochka was 14 years old at that time. That's how she became a city girl. With the proceeds from the sale of land and house, they bought a 2-room flat in the city. The 5-story red brick building was strong. It would stand for a long time. Max was taken to the factory with open arms. The salary was small, but their family made ends meet. Ida quickly made friends with the women neighbors. They told her there was room in the bakery. The old saleswoman had just taken a well-deserved holiday. Working, Ida was well received, not offended. Happiness ended overnight. Max came to pick up his wife from the bakery in an old car. Clumsy bread van in the courtyard, clumsily turned around, crushed under himself a kopeck, not even immediately noticing what happened. Fortunes of the driver and passenger died on the spot. Amanda's urban life began with orphanhood. Amanda used to rush to school like a prodigy, always loved to learn, books about relationships between people so in general swallowed overnight. So she was interested in who and how of the heroes will act when he tail-nailed, in a stalemate plunged into a stalemate with all the guts in front of the choice put in the orphanage where she got after the tragedy, at first snickered, but then sublimated on the study, not to think, not to remember, untimely departed loved ones. 6 months later, her foster parents took her under guardianship, but warm, cordial relations with them were not born. She moved to them in 2 rooms and a communal room, still not an orphanage, where everyone dreamed of a family and parents even at a young age, but she dreamed of growing up and living alone. Naive, touching young lady Amanda tried to assess the behavior of people, to guess who and how they would show themselves, taking into account their temperament and character, a kind of homegrown psychologist. And even more, she liked to think about the fact that a person can be broken to change the line of his behavior, to convince. In the 10th grade, Amanda disappeared in the scientific library, where she read Freud, Jung, Bandura, Halperin, Beckerev. Her classmates did not know the names of such names, and she melted and molted from her new discoveries. Her gold medal at school suffered, sitting days and nights on her heels over textbooks. Her merits did not include gifts, offerings to teachers. There was no one to pay. Talented student high marks were given sincerely and generously. Her peers did not persecute the crazy girl. They had long since given up on her eccentricities, although there were good reasons to pay more attention to her. Amanda was ravishingly beautiful, possessing that very feminine magic when men turn into slaves, admirers, barely having seen such a rare specimen of external perfection. Her hair, the color of ripe wheat, fell in waves down her smooth back. Green eyes with dark pupils beckoned to drown in their depths. Lush forms gave birth to a halo of sensuality. Graceful wrists and ankles hinted at blue blood, charm, aristocratism. Refined nature had not rested on her appearance. Only Amanda herself did not seem to notice any of this, persistently gnawed the granite of science, and ignored the languid glances of representatives of the stronger sex of all ages. After receiving a certificate of secondary education orphan, and even a medalist in the medical university took pity. Dramatic life at the girl, you can make an exception on the budget place to look for a place. She passed the entrance exam on excellent without tutors and material investments. She returned to her flat, left after the death of her parents. Private property, nothing can be done or taken away. She dressed unfashionably, modestly. Not as a garden scarecrow, of course, adhered to strict classics, a little leveling her natural charm. She didn't notice men around her from the word at all. She was so keen on Mrs. Psychology, but one day she fell for a seasoned catcher. Mason was also good-looking, ironic, daring, and unpredictable. With this Amanda managed to she fell head over heels in love. She responded enthusiastically to the offer to drop by for a glass of wine, knowing perfectly well what would follow, except the guy had a nasty little soul. Amanda laid in bed on a bet with a guy from the majors who was courting the girl, but got a turnaround, told a fellow student. "Son, don't sit on the crate. I'll take this girl down without a hitch." He grinned, and then you'll follow the beaten track. Got it. Rip. Don't teach a scientist. The golden child of an important daddy. If you get her to be easy for me, I'll slip you 100 grand. So Mason worked his arse off. Amanda figured out the catch the next time they met after their wild night. Her hot bayo looked like an ice cube. She didn't faint. She rode off her fascination with the smarmy Mason as hormones. Only the fee to the self-confident, handsome man did not get. Amanda made far-reaching conclusions for herself, and now she wouldn't let male representatives within a kilometer of her. Coffee with cakes in the nearest cafe between couples was always welcome. Going to the cinema for the premiere as a group. Why not? The rest of the attempts in her address, reminiscent of courtship, suppressed at the root. Around the crowd of those wishing only hoped in vain, all waited a complete refusal. Trouble for the young doctor after completing the theoretical course of classes did not end there. Place and residency received deservedly in a prestigious psychotherapeutic hospital. They greedily caught every word of her new idol, the head of the Department of Rehabilitation after serious cognitive disorders. He taught the resident a lot, eagerly listening to his recommendations. He handled difficult patients, then helped her with a referral to another prestigious place. And there the persecution from the male community continued. The first swallow, or rather a persistent eagle guest, was one of the doctors with professional weight in the clinic. He did not go round and round. He called the young specialist to his office. "We need to have dinner with you today to discuss the prospects of your work in our institution. Warn me at home that you won't come for the night." He told her directly, without any offense, straight to the forehead, that her career was only through his bed. He abruptly and without regret refused the invitation, for which she soon paid the price. It turned out that before her appearance in this institution with sedatives under strict control, everything was clear. Then she showed up, and expensive pills started going missing in packs. Her involvement or non-involvement in the thefts was not investigated. They quickly pointed at the door, threatening proceedings with a subsequent wolf ticket and blacklisting in the profession. The next incident occurred at the specialized ambulance station where she got a job. The brigades had a narrow focus. to take them out of a hangover, to deal with aggressive behavior that led to a fight, injury to loved ones in a state of temporary effect. Their patients were people on the brink, balancing between the diagnosis of incompetent and incapacitated, living between bouts of mental illness and remission. Why weren't they isolated from society? There were plenty of reasons. Somewhere relatives ransomed the blood babies, and somewhere the border guards themselves were able to prey with the help of money and connections from suspicions of abnormality. Amanda had never realized there were such medical services in their city. She'd been brought here by the same call from a faculty member who'd patronized her during her residency. Trips to the inadequates, as her team called them, were over in a month. That time she was on the same team as the head of their office. He also sometimes took part in psychological raids, saying that he hadn't been to the circus for a long time and wanted to have fun. Amanda was disgusted by his cynicism, but had no choice. After a fairly quiet shift, the supervisor volunteered to give her a lift home. The institution was located outside the city. The first bus was still an hour away. Everyone was tired after a sleepless night. On her own head, the young woman agreed. But the chief didn't go to the city, but drove her to the nearest woods. Bali, I don't like ceremonies. He breathed in her face with his breath. He wasn't afraid of anything. When already in the car, he drank half of a flat glass flask of cognac. Amanda immediately wanted to leave the car, but he only laughed. I have half of the city receive certificates of sanity in the right cases. I'm not afraid of neither the authorities nor the traffic police. She herself could not explain later where the strength came from to slap him hard. The man's head jerked. He looked at his colleague in surprise. Not cooperative, you say? Well, go fish out of here. The field to the city 11 kilometers. While you walk, you will air your brains in the cold. There's no place in my team for a naughty girl. Ask any of our female employees. Now get out. Amanda didn't ask anyone. The next shift, she wrote a letter of resignation, and that was that. Out of practice again, out of work again. She stayed home for a month and a half. None of the clinics did not want to take her even to the place of a nurse. Glimmers of her unreliability filled the medical world, and it was up to everyone to interpret them. Amanda's psychotherapist, advanced in matters of different types of aggression, was well aware of such a Western phenomenon as harassment. But the woman had never imagined that she herself would become its victim. She did not yet know how the owner of a bright female beauty to put up barriers against vile molestations, rudely violating her personal space. This was something she would have to think hard about in the future. A late call from Carl the day before had interrupted a long string of bad luck. She wouldn't just go for the job, she'd crawl into it if she had to. Why was she so scared and excited at the same time? She couldn't explain it herself. What will the coming day bring me? She hummed for some reason, in a bass voice, and then asked further, will I fall pierced by an arrow? Then she would laugh loudly to drive the nasty fear further inwards. The job was ambiguous. A carer for a girl with a fatal blood disorder and Asperger's. The notorious syndrome was unfamiliar to ordinary people far removed from medical terms. In a nutshell, its effect on patients could be characterized as inability, impossibility, or inclination to communicate with the outside world. Existence in their own narrow world into which strangers were rarely allowed. In society, such people are called autistic. The anamnesis of Amanda's future ward was aggravated by a serious blood disease, autoimmune in nature. Inside the unfortunate victim, some cells kept proving to others that they were the main ones, destroying the body tissues caught on the warpath. The patient's condition was now rated medium severity. Protracted remission gave her father a chance to be near his favorite girl longer. But how long the insidious disease will behave decently, knew, in all probability, only the Almighty in heaven. The doctors only parted their hands. May he and see, Carl, we are doing everything we can, but only a miracle can help the girl. You and I live in the real world, with its cruel laws of Mother Nature, ruling over all living beings on the planet. I've heard it all 1,000 times, replied the inconsolable father. What's your advice? How can I brighten her life? If she does not react to any, unconcerned, inactive, quieted, and silent. I've never seen if she can smile. For 16 years of constant uncertainty, it can drive you crazy. The renowned autism spectrum disorder specialist sitting in the chair across from Carl thought for a few seconds. Then, I have one doctor with a not-so-successful professional path. Doesn't get along for long in any treatment facility. and I can't get from her the reasons for these constant fiascos. She was one of the most intelligent students on my course, gave great hopes, burning desire to benefit disadvantaged people, followed all the methods and innovations in our field, and in clinics deflated like a balloon. Unfortunately, I cannot patronize every brilliant student of mine. Made a couple of patronages for her, but it didn't work out. She and I recently met by chance at a cake shop where I was buying a cake for my wife's birthday. Exchanged contacts in case I had information again about vacancies somewhere in our sponsored hospitals. I invite this girl. She did her residency at my hospital, and I can vouch for her almost as much as I can. Carl weighed the pros and cons and decided that he had nothing to lose. The old carers couldn't cope with Elizabeth. So maybe this young girl could do something. There were quite a few residents in his large house. His favorite cook, Vanessa, who had been with him for 30 years, her son Ashley, the gardener, and Vanessa's au pair, a maid with the exotic name of Gabriella. There's room for the unknown Amanda, with 4 guest rooms empty. Gabby, as he called the maid to himself. I'll have to give her the order to do it. The ice of the experiment that would turn their lives around had broken. Amanda decided to start the radical changes in her life with her appearance. She needed to create a new working image that would hide her natural beauty as much as possible. She didn't want this heavenly gift, which she thought was unnecessary and undeserved, to interfere with her work again. The young woman's not-so-extensive wardrobe consisted of loose trousers, baggy skirts in dark colors, oversized jumpers, blouses, low-cut shoes, and boots. A couple of funny pajamas with Chibarashka and Gina and bunnies on the lawn on the prints. Amanda liked lingerie, lace and silk, so no one would see it under her loose clothes. Her hair was a bit of a mess. They did not want to be braided into braids, which were destined to form a curl on her head. Relations of the image was completed by glasses with neutral glasses without diopters. She had bought them for a masquerade party at the university a long time ago. Now they came in handy again, were satisfied with the fitting. Amanda put her camouflage ammunition into a large bag and went to collect her specialized books with much more pleasure. While her patient was resting, she would read everything about autism in more detail. You don't just start treatment from scratch. You need a sober, rational approach to everything. At 800 this morning, as promised by Carl, Amanda's doorbell rang with a smiling guy. "Hi, I'm Andrew. Let me take your things to the car. The chief has asked you to check everything thoroughly for any forgotten items. You won't be able to leave for 3 months. Amanda felt so warm and relaxed by his words, she thought we'd work together. I'll do everything I can to make it work. The journey to her new home took just over 3 hours without traffic. The train station is 2 kilometers away. As if Andrew had read her mute question, there are 6 cars in the garage, 2 drivers. Anything that needs to be bought and brought in, you'll leave it to me. Amanda looked curiously around the majestic, but very pretty house of gentle sandy color with brown original elements of decor on the facade, balconies, a large terrace. The building stood surrounded by parkland, with a large outdoor swimming pool visible in the distance. Now covered with some kind of protective material, the smooth alleys were lined with neat clean tiles, a scattering of coniferous trees. One of the paths was framed with birch trees. The rose garden was wrapped in a film. On the other side of the house, there are some outbuildings resembling small greenhouses. Everywhere boxwood shrubbery, green even in this late autumn. Some exotic, with thick emerald-colored leaves. It's all guard lined up on the porch. "Welcome to our home." These are the words of a tall, formidable woman with a mop of bright red hair. "My name is Vanessa. I'm the housekeeper, like Carlson's Friedenbach, and I'm also the cook." The woman smiled a wide, kind smile and held out a large, soft, warm palm to Amanda. "This fellow with the rake is my son, Ashley. He's a bit of a handyman out of boredom, but his favorite is the garden. It's his domain." And Vanessa continued, "Have you met Andrew? The other driver's name is William. The only one left is our maid Gabriella. Her mum's Spanish. That's where the name came from." Amanda was stared at with 2 large brown eyes by a young lady with a form that was overemphasized by her work clothes. Amanda only had time to think when a tall, elderly man with a noble appearance appeared on the doorstep. She would have addressed him as Your Majesty, or at least Your Graces, or Your Lordship before. Gray, piercing eyes, a short hedgehog of gray hair, regal posture, broad shoulders, pleasant timbre of voice. "Amanda, I am Carl. Gabriella will show you to your room and give you a tour of the house and courtyard. Make yourself comfortable. Our Vanessa will bring the meal schedule to your attention. I expect you in my office in 2 hours for a chat. If it satisfies me, I'll introduce you to my daughter Elizabeth." He turned and disappeared into the house. Ashley picked up Amanda's luggage. Gabriella made an inviting gesture to follow her, and only Vanessa smiled reassuringly at her. "We have lunch at 2:00 p.m. Late arrivals will not be tolerated by the host. Then we'll get to know each other better. Now you have more important things to do without me." Amanda followed Gabriella through the house and hardly listened to the maid's peaceful mutterings. She was impressed by her room, with its separate bathroom and toilet, its huge windows overlooking the garden, its elegant yet homely atmosphere. She did not know yet how her life in this house would turn out, but she was already eager to make herself useful, and Amanda's relationship with her foster parents was normal. But whether it was modern trends that influenced them, or whether her interests were very different from those of the older generation, they rarely saw each other, and the occasion was reduced to routine phone calls like, "Hey, daughter, how are you? Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine with us too," as the dialogue usually ended, or was reduced to discussing another talk show on TV or gossip about the neighbors in the yard. It was stifling for Amanda in such a boring framework. To see each other was for her birthday, to drop by with presents before New Year's Eve. But to tell her father and mother how difficult and lonely it was for her in this world of people was out of the question. She's an adult, independent, a cutoff piece. She had not formed with her guardians in special soulful closeness, when one for all and all for one. The older generation did not understand her choice of profession, but moving to a flat, leaving on her own, approved. Adopted daughter stopped chasing them for the empty time spent near the TV in the arms of fried seeds, without attempts to develop intelligence. Different blood, different destinies, on different paths rushing. In this large, beautiful dwelling, Amanda felt in her gut some kind of unity between the household. She had not been here for half an hour yet, and she already wanted to stay for a long time. Tired of the long monologue, Gabriella led her to the door of Carl's study at the end of her tour of the building and garden, and "I don't like ceremonies and antimonies. We'll be rubbing our sides against each other all day long. Don't barge in on your master, knock first. He doesn't take kindly to familiarity." Amanda nodded, agreeing to the "you" and thanking her for the tips. Gabriella left, swaying her hips gently, and the therapist thought to herself, "There's a reason this nymph is trying so hard. Probably there's an object of her attention in the house, for the sake of which she is constantly in a state of combat readiness to beckon, to envelop with charms, to conquer the heart. Does she have her eye on the master? It's a good thing I took care of my modest appearance beforehand. I will not be so conspicuous to the domestic public as Gabriella deliberately does. They'll have to deal with that themselves. I have other tasks." Amanda knocked firmly on the study door and entered after a shout from her host. Yes, come in. I'm in my office." The office, though still an inexperienced practitioner, but a very strong theorist, liked it at first sight. Furniture made of noble wood, endless shelves with books, elegant statuettes, excellent landscapes and stylish frames on the walls. A desk with a large desktop computer, a music center with speakers in a corner, a separate cabinet with CDs. She didn't know Carl at all yet, but this office seemed to shout out loud, My owner is far from stupid, well-read and educated, intelligent and successful." Carl himself invited her to sit in the soft armchair by the coffee table, not telling her her subordinate place in the room, seating her at the desk opposite him. Ringing the bell, he summoned Gabriella. "Make us a couple of cups of coffee, please, or would you prefer juice or tea?" Amanda gratefully agreed to the coffee. She had been so nervous this morning that she hadn't even had breakfast at home, and now she was afraid that her traitorous stomach would give her away, rumbling loudly at the worst possible moment. Lucky for her, along with coffee, Gabriella had brought a vase of walnut biscuits, a box of chocolates, and a jug of cream. Amanda pounced on the treats like a hungry wolf, but she saw no judgment in Carl's eyes. He liked sincerity and directness in people, even smiled. "We're not welcoming you well. Your first day on the road. They didn't even offer you tea." Amanda tried to say with a full mouth that everything was fine, then smiled helplessly back, wiped the crumbs off her lips, and carefully finished the rest of the biscuits. "You'll have to forgive me. I was nervous, so I went for the sweets. Thanks for the coffee. Nay, let's get back to business." Carl would never admit to his partners or to this young woman that he likes to do his inspections the old-fashioned way. It was an approach he had borrowed from his father, a simple farmer who had spent his life cultivating the land and growing cereal crops. Now his father, unfortunately, was no longer able to work. 5 years ago, Carl had bought a house in the neighboring village where his parents were now living. The older generation flatly refused to move into Carl's mansion, arguing that the land in their vegetable garden was much closer and more interesting to them than the park landscapes of their son's estate. Having a kind-hearted housekeeper, the son stopped persuading them to live together. Now they only went to visit each other and to family holidays. But he remembered his father's instruction that any hired laborer should first be fed heartily, see how he copes with the meal, and then draw conclusions. If a person eats sincerely without greediness and false shyness, he will be good. But if he tells that he is not hungry, takes only a couple of crumbs from the table for decency, he will work so sluggishly. Any qualified recruiter would die with laughter from such a method of personnel selection. But Carl had long ago learnt from his own experience that the method works without fail. After handing Gabriella a tray with empty cups, Amanda's boss started the conversation. "Your candidacy was recommended to me by a professor who sometimes counsels my daughter. Before you begin your duties, I would like to briefly tell you our backstory. Not as a stranger to me yet, but as a therapist, Elizabeth, my wife, and I have a late baby. My spouse passed away a week after she was born. Heart failure. I have an older son, Harry. He lives and works in Europe, in our branch in Prague, and comes here occasionally. Harry was born when my wife and I were very young. Now he is 33 years old. Our student marriage, made by great mutual love, turned out to be very strong. We lived soul to soul, and only one thing upset my chosen one. After the birth of Harry, a series of miscarriages followed. Much else, my wife dreamed of a second child, a girl, even the name of her beforehand in honor of her mother, to whom my wife was infinitely attached. At the age of 44, my wife got pregnant once again, was infinitely happy, but the doctors grabbed their heads. Even the usual examination, which all expectant mothers undergo, revealed a serious arrhythmia. The heart could not cope with the double load. Problems with the work of blood vessels began. Doctors feared that the baby was not getting enough of the nutrients it needed. My wife, almost all the time lying in the clinic, only looked at me pleadingly and asked, "Don't let the doctors terminate this pregnancy. I will take care, fulfill all their appointments. I have to carry this baby to term." Her zeal increased even more after the ultrasound showed that she was carrying a girl. The wife became finally obsessed with the idea that it was heaven that finally took pity on us and was giving us this last chance. My wife bravely endured 9 months of agonizing waiting and an endless series of procedures and injections and surgical intervention in the form of a cesarean section. The neonatologist's verdict was a blow to her. They immediately began to suspect some abnormalities in the girl. A detailed examination showed that she inherited an extremely rare genetic blood disease transmitted through the female line. People with a do not live long, 10-15 years at most. The news broke the wife, shattered everything in her already sick heart. Arrhythmia attacks began to recur with wicked persistence. She never returned home from the hospital. Elizabeth was discharged after 2 months of scrupulous observation. At first, I was desperate, resentful of the little girl for taking away the woman I loved and leaving me alone in the world. He was 17 at that time. I am still amazed that he was a wise adult even then, convinced me that everything was destined by fate, that he too had lost his mom. But it was her life, her dream, and her choice. You won't believe it, but it was he who, together with the nanny, looked after the baby, quickly learned to change her nappies and feed her specialized formula. The second blow was that soon doctors noticed that Elizabeth was different, not like other children. Her genetic disorder had not yet manifested itself, but she drove us crazy by the fact that she did not react to our presence at 6 months, at 1 year, and then. Imagine the picture: the child eats, sleeps, but does not react to us, to a lot of colorful toys around him. The face is like a frozen mask, no vivid facial expressions, no gestures, as you sit or lay down in such a position and will freeze, sometimes for quite a long time. The girl turned out to be pretty, even pretty. Big-eyed, curls of blonde hair, chubby arms and legs, but she behaved like a puppet, like an artificial doll. After a while, she was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, or autism. Doctors assured her that this type of autism spectrum disorder boded well for her prospects. Body functions would be partially developed, but not fully developed. I took Elizabeth to Europe. There, the doctors were able to perform almost a miracle. They removed the sleep disorder, adapted her eating to the right regime, and taught her to react at least a little to what was going on. I came back from Germany almost happy. Elizabeth began to recognize her family, babbled something in a language we didn't know, sometimes tried to express something with gestures, but she still hadn't learned to smile. On the street, she turned around at the noise during walks on a trip to the Black Sea and pushed her legs up when Harry and I tried to bathe her in it. Later, I sent Harry to study in the UK, and as if as a reward for my troubles, my business grew and grew like on yeast, bringing me more and more income. We built this house together with my wife. It was her idea to live away from the hustle and bustle of the city. In the peaceful countryside, the man briefly interrupted his narrative. It was obvious that the story stirred up old memories in him. He looked at his watch and then looked up a little. There are only 15 minutes left till lunch. The rest you will learn in the process of work. I'll just add the main thing. The autoimmune disease, like a hungry hydra on the hunt, reared its head sharply when Elizabeth entered puberty. Everything was always delayed compared to her peers. So it happened about 2 years ago. At her 14, those former merits of the medical profession began to fade quickly. It seemed that the destruction of cell tissue by her own internal aggressors was causing her brain activity to go to sleep. The few dozen words that she had previously spoken cheerfully were forgotten. She is once again indifferent to what is going on around her. Happy to walk with Vanessa outdoors, even swimming in the pool with Ashley's help. The girl has forgotten all those skills. More and more often, she won't let herself get out of bed, now moves only in a wheelchair, eats almost nothing, loses weight. I realize, Amanda, that you're not a miracle worker or a god. The doctors have already told me that the girl has no more than a year to live. The deterioration of her fragile body is progressing. For myself, I have labeled your tasks as facilitating her departure to the next world. I know it's impossible, but I still dream of her smiling when she looks at our park, our home, the sky, and the sun. I guess I want too much from you. Amanda was in shock. No, not at the task set before her. Here she would do everything she could, apply all her knowledge. There was such pain and despair in the man's eyes. He spoke so courageously about his daughter's imminent departure from this world that the visiting therapist's blood ran cold. So much for the high fence, the rich house, and the walls of which for so many years trouble has lived at ease. Despite the pleasant faces of the people who built it, the lunch was gorgeous. Vanessa cooked so deliciously that Amanda didn't even notice that she ate all of it. She reached for some very unusual salad, and several people answered her mute question about where Elizabeth was. "Elizabeth is having lunch in her room," said Carl. "We'll go to meet her after dinner." "Mate," he says. "I've already made her favorite meatballs and mashed potatoes," Vanessa added. "And I picked a bunch of brightly colored September berries behind the house. I think Elizabeth is excited by their sharp autumn scent." Only Gabby, Elizabeth's father, had called the maid that once in a conversation in the study, and Amanda had picked up the nickname mentally, so shorter and much simpler ate, staring intently at her plate. She seemed to care the least, if at all, about Elizabeth's plight. "We'll have to keep an eye on this smashing person," Amanda decided to herself. "She's prepared my room perfectly, no complaints." But did she make any insinuations about her patient? In dealing with an autistic patient, all means are good, and all little things can be global. After these words, everyone at the table was again distracted by sweet cakes and compote. Amanda thought to herself through her grief, dreams, and thoughts. "It's good. Here they have a soul." The servants dine at the same table with the master. Everyone is praying for the girl as best they can, all trying to brighten her life. Her thoughts were interrupted by Carl's voice. "Amanda, are you ready to see your patient?" The woman replied enthusiastically that she was looking forward to it, and she was not the least bit wrong. The curtains were drawn in Elizabeth's room. It was dark, and there was a kind of gloom and despair. Amanda immediately noted to herself that this had to change. It was understandable. A seriously ill person lived here, but it was not worth emphasizing it with decorations. The girl did not react to their appearance. At that moment, Vanessa brought a tray with Amanda's favorite dishes. The therapist decided not to put her work on hold. "Carl, Vanessa, let me feed Elizabeth, and we'll have a chat. Leave us alone." "Elizabeth is your new doctor, Amanda. She'll be with you almost nonstop. You don't mind if we leave you two alone, do you?" Again, there was no visible reaction. The girl obediently opened her mouth at the sight of food, chewing and swallowing like a puppet. But Amanda began her monologue. I'm not a doctor or a carer for you, Elizabeth. I prefer the status of friend. I'll be there for you of my own free will, even though I'm an employee. I'll tell you the truth, I'd stay with you for free, as long as I like it very much. Your wonderful house, the place, the people, you. Tomorrow you and I are going to turn your room upside down. I don't think it will be bad for your health. For a split second, Amanda thought there was a flicker of something in the girl's eyes, some glimmer of reaction, but it all went out again very quickly, and it could have been the insidious play of light and shadow in the room at all. The doctor, under a shower, decided to think about it in her room later, but in the meantime she dressed her ward in warm clothes and took her in her pram to the courtyard to breathe the strong air of golden autumn. From that moment on, the days in the house followed a long-established pattern. In the morning, Amanda and Elizabeth had breakfast together in the girls' room. Then there were the inevitable drips and injections to combat the manifestations of genetic malfunctions. The obligatory 2-hour walk in the garden, where Ashley always lovingly tended the plants. Lunch in the great hall. At this meal, Amanda would spend time with the household and then feed Elizabeth. The patient's therapeutic sleep, a new batch of medication dripping steadily through the IV for a couple of hours at a time. Dinner, now in the presence of Carl, who on weekdays was always at work, and in the evenings and weekends worked hard at home in his office. Exhausted by the endless procedures, the patient fell into a deep sleep as early as 10 o'clock in the evening. Amanda studied the works of colleagues related to autism again and again. There were no changes in terms of closer contact with her ward, neither for the worse nor for the better. The girl's condition remained stable. Amanda talked to Elizabeth about everything, told her about the plot of her favorite fiction books, read her poems, showed her reproductions of paintings from a large colorful album. Or rather, the word talking is not appropriate here at all. The doctor conducted her eternal monologue, and the girl listened to it indifferently. The other day, already beginning to despair, a little doctor found in one of the foreign articles information that to level the manifestations of isolation with autism, for patients can be a good help to communicate with the animal world. For some reason, there were no pets in Carl's house. After a general meeting of all the residents of the mansion, it was decided to get a puppy of a large dog. Most of all, for some reason, everyone liked a Canadian Newfoundland. 2 days later, Andrew brought a shaggy black treasure with stormy eyes from a kennel breeding this particular breed. He was irresistible. It is commonly believed that our lesser brothers have no intelligence. What told Tim then that the full name Timothy, and not some Bax or Lord, was so much nicer, that he was meant for Elizabeth. Finding himself in a room as a guest, the place had long since been on Amanda's errand, a more racy setting with lots of brightly colored elements. Tim headed straight for the girl and rubbed his wet nose into her palm. The doctor was sure there was a flicker of reaction in Elizabeth's eyes, lightning fast, but she had no doubt, bright and positive. For the first time, Amanda felt they were on the right track. By New Year's Eve and Christmas, everyone in the house was expecting Harry from Prague. Amanda didn't know the young man. She only remembered Vanessa's words. He's golden. Elizabeth transforms when her big brother arrives. She can't smile, but here it's like her face lights up. Gabriella, who was present during their conversation, added, "And what a handsome man Harry is. Respectable, decent, wise, but at the same time outwardly a typical example of Hollywood hero lover. 2 characters in one person, it's so intriguing." Vanessa immediately echoed her words. "Oh, Gabriella, go change Elizabeth's bedclothes. While she and Amanda are out for a walk. You've got Cupid's days on your mind, you're not the right girl. Roll your lips." Gaby, wiggling her hips as usual, walked away, and the cook gave her a shrug and said to Amanda, "The girl goes completely off the rails when the owner's son flies home from Europe, making eyes at him, and he looks at her like she's nothing. He had a bride, but she cheated on her husband while he was earning money in the Czech Republic. They ran away, although the foolish young lady was begging us, shedding tears, just that the hair on her head did not tear in despair that she missed a rich party. It didn't help. Harry couldn't trust her at all, couldn't forgive her for seeing another man at the same time." Sighing sorrowfully, Vanessa suddenly suggested, "Come to my room tonight, and we'll have a tea party. I'll tell you my story, how Carl saved me from trouble, and why I've since nicknamed him the Angel of Goodness." On the walk, Amanda and Ashley discussed raising a new pet. It wasn't right for a pedigree dog to go pear-shucking in the yard. The gardener had told her he'd always wanted a dog. He patiently put up with Tim's antics, even forgave him for ramming a rose bush wrapped in cling film into the yard on the run. Amanda again thought that Elizabeth, sitting in the wheelchair, made some movement in the direction of the mischievous Newfoundlander, but she was in no hurry to express her assumptions aloud. We must watch and watch and watch again and again. There it would be seen. After supper, when she was satisfied that Elizabeth had fallen into a restful sleep, she closed her door firmly and knocked on the next door. "Come in, I've been waiting. I've made us some green tea with molasses and gooseberry jam and nuts. Now we'll have a feast." Oksana had been in the chef's room only briefly before, but now she could examine the room in more detail. The same elegance and home coziness, spiced with personal things dear to her heart. There were many framed photographs on the wall, Carl and his wife still very young, Elizabeth in various angles, Ashley in the garden, then near the gazebo, then by the pool, a handsome young man on horseback. That's our Harry. A handsome man. Gabriella doesn't mince words. God grant him personal happiness. He's like his father in business. He should have children of his own, and he's still traveling abroad. I realize he's no monk, but all these windy girlfriends aren't what he needs for marriage. He'll make a marvelous father. He loves Elizabeth. Vanessa ate another spoonful of clear amber and emerald gooseberry jam and began her tale. After high school 35 years ago, I trained as a food technologist. Not just any culinary school in New York City. I dreamed of a career as a chef, the kind that would get me Michelin stars for the art of cooking. It didn't work out. The reason for everything was my uncluttered appearance. Height under 1 m, size 42 feet, fullness, bright copper hair, angular movements, lack of taste in the choice of wardrobe. Of course, chefs are not chosen by their clothes, but representatives of the personnel service in all the cafes and restaurants where I tried to get a job after graduation refused me under any plausible pretext. In one prestigious restaurant, only the lady in personnel was honest. Our customers often invite the chef of the dish to the room if they like it. You cannot be a business card of our institution. You're only fit for a place in the circus buffet. I don't say this harshly because I'm cynical, not at all. I like to be honest with the people I hire. It's better that way than looking away shamefacedly and keeping a kook in my pocket. And yet my traveling in agony was one day crowned with success. I was taken to a private cafe Tarina Tamara with authentic Georgian cuisine. The owner is a small, bald Georgian with hooked fingers and crooked legs. He then temporarily dispelled even the myth for me that Caucasian men are always endowed with a sharp oriental beauty. Curly-haired, black-eyed, daring, this man said without a word of criticism. I have a wife who is ill in a female way. She can't sleep with me. And I am a man. I need to save my physiology. You'll work in the kitchen and visit me a couple of times a week. If you do well, I'll make you head chef, and then maybe chief. I, from his words at first, in a precipitate fell out, said that I would think about it, and then I calculated in the Institute 6 years at the correspondence department. Before that, 2 years as an assistant cook in the canteen. I am not today, so tomorrow 26 years old will be. And I'm still wearing girls. There's no cue for my red-headed soul. No one even looked at me with that enveloping male gaze full of desire. Ever. Blushing and pale, 2 days later informed that I agreed to all the terms. The owner of Tarina Tamara glared at me, invited me to the back room. There I learnt the basics of love between crates of vegetables, herbs and boxes of vodka, which in decanters was later passed off as cha-cha. It's a shame. It's a shame. Come on. Big physiological love on a quick hand honestly lasted between me and the chief for 1.5 years. And then I got pregnant, having learnt the news. My lover was not ceremonious, dismissed in no time. He kept bemoaning that I shouldn't talk, that his wife shouldn't know anything. He has 3 grown-up children, they'll see who he's staring at. The family will laugh. He paid me 3 months' salary in advance and washed his paternal hands of me. About the fact that the baby should be born, I informed him not immediately. All the time delayed, I felt that this news will not turn out well. With my general fullness, belly became noticeable only in the 6th or 7th month. Just before the usual official maternity leave, I found myself on the street. My rent ran out 2 weeks before Ashley was born. All I had was an aunt in a remote village. I can't even tell you how close we are. I'd never seen my father before. My mother drank herself to death when I was 20. She was homeless at first, and then she went missing. But I never doubted for a second that the baby would be. I'm alone in this world, and this will be my own blood. The landlady of my flat is not a kind-hearted person, but she took pity, waited until I gave birth and discharged from the maternity hospital. She gave me a month to do everything, and then she put up with it for free. And then her children came to live with her. They had nowhere to live, so she showed me the door. We went with a 1-month-old baby to grieve. We stayed a week in a shabby hotel, but my son was restless. The noise insulation in the building was shitty. Other guests began to complain that we did not let them sleep at night. We moved out to nowhere. I'm sitting at the intercity bus stop with my stuff in Ashley's bundle. I thought I'd go to the countryside, see if I could find an abandoned house. I had enough money in my purse for a week's existence. When an expensive dark Jeep pulled up next to the bus stop, I didn't even immediately realize that the driver was asking me what I had. I sat there in tears. And it was him. At that time, the house in these parts built a house, looking for a local specialized shop that recently erected on the highway. I gave him the address, why not, but he didn't leave at once. Later, he told me that my eyes were like those of a beaten dog, and there was so much desperation in them that he couldn't resist asking. "Woman, why are you sitting in the wind with a baby? I can give you a lift somewhere, even if it's in the other direction." I don't know how it happened, but I told him all my troubles in 2 words, as if I were in the wind. He chuckled and thought about it for a few minutes, then asked, "A professional cook, you say?" "I'm looking for such a specialist. I need to feed 2 teams of workers every day. We can provide you with a boxcar for accommodation." Of course, I didn't hesitate for a second. It was getting late, and the bus was delayed, so I was going to sleep in the field with Ashley, right on the dead grass. I gathered up my few belongings and climbed into the warmth of the car. There was no fear or apprehension. I was used to the work, and I loved my craft. Vanessa interrupted her long story and poured her and Amanda another cup of fragrant tea. She brought from the kitchen a dish of ruddy cakes left over from dinner and glanced briefly at Amanda. "Have I bored you with my tales yet, Doctor?" "Not at all, Vanessa. It's rare for anyone to talk to me so heartily to confide their secrets to me. I am very grateful to you for this frankness." "Then I will continue," said the woman. Then everything was much more pleasant. Guy's workers met me as a mother, starved on dry meat, and I with a move them borscht boiled on a brain bone, cooked cutlets, wheat porridge in a cast iron steamed with butter. When they brought to the table in compote, the foreman could not stand it. "You cook deliciously, Vanessa. We haven't seen such delicacies here for a long time. Therefore, guys, I will order the following. We have 15 people working here. It's hard to feed that many without a well-equipped kitchen. So we'll distribute the daily duty. Who of the men will help with wood for the stove, who will carry water, who will help the cook with other hard work. She's got a little boy in her arms. He needs to be fed and nursed. So have a conscience, brothers. Don't sit on this young woman's neck, and don't offend her in word or deed." That's how I found myself in our yard about 30 years ago, when it was still under construction. Ashley is my native gold, having grown up here. After the building was finished, I stayed in the house with the owners, Carl and his wife and Harry's little boy at the time. Oh, what a table I made for their housewarming party. The guests could only wonder where he'd found such a cook. There were various people in the house, high-ranking and with connections. Many times they tried to lure me to other houses. How could they do such a thing? An angel of goodness from heaven appeared to me one autumn evening at a bus stop, and I'd betray him when others beckoned. Elizabeth was born to me, her nannies and carers, and Carl made me head of the house and promoted me to housekeeper. Everyone here has become dear to me. Even that empty Gabriella with her dreams of hunting Carl's son doesn't seem like an enemy. That's my story for you, Amanda. Maybe it will help you in your work. Amanda went to her room pensive. She used to trust the notion that the rich were stingy with their souls. In Carl's house, she saw a different world, full of warmth, respect, and a willingness to help each other through the difficult realities of life. Her fervent conviction to do everything she could to make Elizabeth feel at least a little better became even stronger in her mind. From the next day, she increased the therapeutic load for the girl, insisted on the return of massage procedures, deciding that they were not harmful to the body, broken by the disease, and on the contrary, contribute to its tone. Elizabeth was still unresponsive to the change in regime. Only the appearance of Timothy's shaggy puppy seemed to revitalize her face a little. Amanda didn't give up. She wheeled her pram around the park and sat Elizabeth down to watch Ashley's dog. He took the assignment seriously. Little Tim already knew the commands: sit, down, place, come, walk. In the house, the Newfoundland recognized only two people as masters: Elizabeth, at whose feet he spent all his free time, and Ashley, who fed and brought him up. The days were running by, and the winter holidays, New Year's Eve and Christmas, everyone's favorite, were approaching. Amanda, Gaby, and Vanessa were happy to decorate the already pretty house with fir tree arrangements, colorful wreaths, and sculptures of fairy tale characters. Ashley installed artificial Christmas trees in all the rooms, richly decorated with expensive toys. Everyone was in a pre-holiday mood. 3 days before New Year's Eve, Amanda received an unexpected phone call from her only close friend. "Amanda, you're going to fall over. I have big news. I'm getting hastily married and moving to Florida with my lover. He's a military engineer. We're going to live near the Cape Canaveral spaceport." Amanda was instantly sad. With Olivia, they were like sisters almost, since the orphanage together, always supported each other, and now they were going to be separated. Meanwhile, her friend continued to chatter into the phone. "On the 30th of December, I have a farewell bachelorette party in a nightclub. On the 2nd of January, we have a one-way flight. No cancellations. Amanda, I've prepared a present for you for the road. I've made an evening dress. It's amazing. It's not worthy of your beauty, but it'll set it off beautifully." If Olivia could see me now, she would die laughing, thought the nurse. Recently, she had overheard Gaby's remarks about her. The maid gave her a scornful look after dinner and summarized. "Our therapist is a moth-pale mouse gray. How only the earth bears such shapeless, faceless women. They're worthless, and men probably avoid such a scarecrow a mile away." Amanda promised Olivia to call back by nightfall and went to Elizabeth's room. The girl, after a hearty dinner, a walk before, was already fast asleep, sprawled out on the soft pillows. After adjusting the blanket, she slipped out into the corridor. The conversation with Carl was not going to be easy. At her timid knock on the door of the study, the owner responded at once. "Come in. I've just finished going through the evening's papers." "Is something the matter?" "I had an emergency." She outlined the situation in a nutshell, but I'll accept whatever you decide. "The fact is, someone close to me is going away for a long time. We won't get a chance to see each other if I can't make it to my friend's appointment. I'm not a warden in prison or a cousin in the zone to keep you locked up, Amanda. You've been in our house for a month and a half without leave." Elizabeth is doing well, if not brilliantly, without a hint of deterioration. "I am pleased with your initiatives, methods, and practical experiments. None of them have been detrimental to my sick daughter. Be sure to go to the city. I'll give you 24 hours. On the 31st of December, after 8 p.m., you must return to these walls." Amanda didn't leave his office. She flew out on wings. Vanessa was in the kitchen, and the released nurse couldn't help but share her news with her. "I'm ugly," Amanda said, "but everyone wants a bit of colorful holiday. And when I get to see my Olivia again." "You're ugly?" She smiled back at the cook. "Save the fairy tales for others, my dear. All your masquerades won't fool me, a clever old lady who has lived in this world. I've long guessed that you hide your beauty under a dull image, wearing glasses. Don't you worry, this secret stays between us. If you're doing this, you must have a good reason. Your profession doesn't get in the way of all this cross-dressing, and my business is my business." Amanda turned round at a run, rushed back into the kitchen, and hugged the cookery master warmly and tenderly. "I know two angels of kindness in this house already. Vanessa, your kindness and willingness to understand and accept is in no way inferior to your host's graciousness." She gave Vanessa an embarrassed peck on her lush cheek, smelling of vanilla and apples, and rushed off to call Olivia to cheer her up with the news. Considering that Olivia worked as a fashion designer in one of the city's attires, the dress for Amanda turned out to be luxurious. Soft, tight silk of dark blue color emphasized every curve of the graceful figure, while not forgetting all the proper charms and roundness, the neckline, and the slit on the leg in the very point and measure. A string of pearls, a bracelet and earrings that her adoptive parents gave her on her 25th birthday, exactly in tone and in the general style of the outfit. As she dressed her friend in one of the changing booths in the atelier, Olivia froze with admiration. "Amanda, You are going to be a goddess this evening. And your fiancé, I'm sure he won't waver. He's already seen you in our shared photos. But the rest of the male sex will be at your feet, you'll see. Oh, I'd rather stay away from all these signs of intrusive male attention. Amanda replied bitterly, I've had enough sad experiences in this area. It seems to me that decent, if not knights, at least adequate gentlemen are no longer in this world. I have only come across representatives who managed to disappoint me for a long time. I'm going home to my flat to fix my hair and nails and stuff. I'll meet you at the club tonight. The place called Big City Lights met Amanda, who arrived by taxi with a stunningly colorful appearance. Dressed up fir trees and pine trees, colored lights and tinsel shining in their light, the crowd dressed to the hilt. Her favorite friend Olivia was wrong. There were many real beauties on the dance floor, at the tables, at the bar, worthy to become the prima donnas of this evening and the coming night. On the eve of the new year, it seemed that everyone tried not to hit in the dirt face. The audience was already relaxed by the fountain of hot drinks. Amanda breathed a sigh of relief. No one around her cared about her, but she was glad too soon. At one of the tables, Mason was having a good time with his friends. Her first and only man. At the sight of Amanda relaxed and chatting serenely with Olivia and the rest of the girls, a greedy gleam lit up in the man's eyes. And that girl just got even more beautiful. I shouldn't have let that bird out of the love cage back then. Such a friend next to me will make the image of any successful man, he thought to himself, lewdly grinning. Today again I will get her into bed. Deciding to give his victim at least one drink to make her more agreeable, Mason returned to his company, but kept Amanda in his sights. After about an hour, Mason ran out of patience. He decided to go and teach the wayward babe a lesson by humiliating her in front of her friends. Amanda suddenly appeared behind him with a banal greeting. I see what people are like without a bodyguard. Do you want me to protect your gorgeous body from the claims of other men? Amanda jerked away from Mason in surprise. But she didn't want to spoil Olivia's wonderful evening, so she quickly got up from the table and led Mason away from the bar. What do you want? You and I dotted all the I's and T's a long time ago. Go back to whoever you're spending the night with and leave me alone. But it wasn't so easy to stop the smarmy bastard. He wasn't about to give up his intentions to sleep with such a lovely woman again. Come on, Amanda. Let's have a nice glass of red wine to this chance encounter and part as friends. I didn't mean to piss you off. I just thought you might have something to remember from the pages of our brief affair. The woman prudently decided not to make a scandal because of casual circumstances and obediently followed the man. At the counter, Mason ordered 2 glasses of some expensive grape wine and from an overseas collection, generously bought a chocolate bar and nuts sprinkled with sugar. He put his arm round Amanda's waist. The man's calculation was trivial, that now his old acquaintance would get drunk and become more docile, but he was wrong. Amanda drained her wine glass without even tasting it and looked boldly into her ex-lover's eyes. Am I free of you now? Is the ritual honored? Mason was not accustomed to such behavior of ladies. He had never been refused, so he began to whisper in her ear. This is not the end of our New Year's Eve date, my dear. Don't get your hopes up. I'm going to rent a private office, and you're going to be gentle with me. I remember everything, my lovely. Here we go again. Amanda thought with annoyance. Why is it that when a man is around, all his desires are always reduced to one thing? She looked around helplessly. There was no one around except a young man calmly sipping whiskey at the counter. And their eyes met. And what did the stranger read? But he slid valiantly off the bar stool and approached them. This woman is here with me. I only stepped away from the table for a short while, and you, young man, immediately took advantage of my absence. Mason's eyes widened in surprise. What kind of businessman are you? Where did you come from? Amanda remembered the rest of it as if in a nightmare. The man who'd come to her rescue had lifted Mason off the floor like a feather and given him a solid slap on the wrist. But the bitchy, temper tantrum-hardened man didn't calm down. Before retreating from the battlefield, he grabbed his unfinished glass of red wine and splashed the brightly colored liquid directly onto Amanda's dress. A huge maroon stain instantly spread across the silk. The woman turned pale, and her unexpected knight grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to the bathroom. On the way, he said something about washing the cloth quickly. Then there would be no trace left. Amanda was worried about something else entirely. No one had ever stood up for her before in her life. Suddenly, on some impulse, she threw her arms around the man's neck and dragged him with her to the club's exit, stopping only for a moment at the cloakroom to retrieve his coat. "I've got a car. I have an appointment here with an old friend, but he's running late." But Amanda didn't listen to him. As in a dream, she dragged the newly disembarked passengers along the cold autumn street to the car with checkers. She didn't care about propriety, about her ruined outfit, about the surprise of her companion who followed her obediently. There was only one single thought in her head. How good it is that I like to wear expensive silk linen. It won't be embarrassing. In her flat, where she had brought a random knight from the club. She pounced on the man like a tigress, like a ravenous march cat. And he didn't fight back. Everything that happened between them was like being in the Garden of Eden. The body sang, the soul rejoiced, the thoughts danced the can-can. How tired I am of being well-mannered and decent. Let it all be a one-time thing. I don't even know his name, though my casual lover is obviously handsome and not stupid. Of the latter, she was somehow sure, though they hadn't said a word to each other. In the morning, they fell asleep together without breaking their embrace, but Amanda woke up alone. Apart from the crumpled bed and a pillow that still smelled of a man's perfume, there was nothing in her flat that reminded her of the night before. She brewed coffee, pulled out her shoebox stash to buy Christmas presents for everyone in Carl's house. She was beginning to think of all these people as family. And the night, what could she do about it? That it had come to an end. All New Year's Eve magic comes to an end at some point. Gone was Father Christmas, having rid her of the vile mason. It's just a pity she didn't even feed the stranger breakfast, though the fridge is empty, and there's no bread, not even a slice. But she can make delicious pancakes. Okay, flour, sugar, vanilla, milk. There's a block of frozen butter in the freezer. But dream away. She needs to get back to her chores. Amanda went back to her fancy dress of a simpleton fool, packed her bag and rang Andrew. Carl's driver had promised to take her shopping for presents and get her back to the manor by the appointed time. Amanda suddenly thought that the man she had spent this magical night with was also an angel of goodness and protection, at least for her personally. Her mood was twofold: sadness at the separation and something unfulfilled, and joy that such fireworks had happened in her rather bland life. At Carl's house, she and Andrew were there at 8 p.m. sharp, like clockwork. On the doorstep, Amanda was held up by Ashley and Tim. The gardener, embarrassed, handed her a bouquet made of spruce paws with pine cones and boughs of glittery sprinkles. Gabriella appeared on the porch, painted today, apparently in honor of New Year's Eve, in all the colors of the rainbow. Colored mascara, eyeliner, shadow, blush, lipstick. Strangely, with the maid's naturally good looks, it didn't even spoil her. "Why, Ashley, you've been flaunting your attentions all over the place, and you said you loved me to the grave. Are your feelings," she misspelled the word, "faded already? Have you switched to our doctor?" The modest, quiet, ordinary gardener suddenly decided to fight back. "I haven't had time to give you my simple gift yet, but don't touch Amanda. Don't you dare even speak to her in a disrespectful manner. You're not worth a fingernail." Gabriella gave Ashley a scornful glance and sang back, "Shut up already, you gardening scarecrow. You're not the one I'm waiting here for. Harry should be here soon. The man's no match for you. Learn from him what a man with a capital letter looks and acts like." Amanda took Ashley's arm and led her away from him to interrupt the unpleasant monologue. "You don't listen to her filthy words, Ashley. A man who can love plants and animals so well, it's like he's an extension of them on this earth. Some of us become an angel of kindness to others, heals and saves lost unhappy souls. And someone becomes a kind of shepherd, guide, conductor for flora and fauna, protects it from human cruelty, uses people for good, not spoiling, sparing, wisely. You are one of such angels of goodness for Mother Nature. Be proud of such an exceptional status. You have earned it." Amanda pecked the confused Ashley on the cheek and walked up the stairs. In the distance, she heard the sound of a car approaching the house, but she was already running to her ward. It was New Year's Eve, and Elizabeth wasn't ready. Vanessa had her hands full with the table. Everything was sparkling and glittering in the decorated hall. The table was bursting with food and drink, and all the family was dressed up. Even Amanda had changed her shapeless jumper for a white blouse with lace and a black skirt. The only things left in place were the wispy curl on her head and the funny glasses on the bridge of her nose. Carl came to the table in a soft cashmere pullover and loose light-colored trousers. Vanessa had little gold tinsel bows on her head and in her apron. Gabriella wore a provocative purple dress with a low neckline and a deep cutout on the back. It was the way the dishes were served to the table. In her chair sat a rather plain Elizabeth, wearing a delicate violet-colored dress. Amanda had done her hair. The girl looked refreshed. At her feet, as usual, lay the faithful guard Timothy. Ashley had specially washed him with dog shampoo for the holiday. His coat was shiny and even silvery in places. Amanda had already handed out presents to everyone, little Christmas decorations depicting angels in various outfits. All of them, if you shook them a little, made a melodious chime. We started to sit down at the table at 22 in the evening. We had to see off the old year, thank it for all the good things, and ask it to take the bad things with it. Carl went out to hurry his son, and soon they were in the hall together. Amanda was just taking a sip of orange juice when the man she had spent tonight with appeared in front of Elizabeth and her. She even caught the end of the sentence. "I'm sorry, Father, I was late. There were unforeseen circumstances. And then I also had to reschedule an important business meeting that had canceled yesterday." Amanda choked up and blinked her eyes, frightened. And then a miracle happened in front of everyone. There was no other word for it. Elizabeth became animated, reached out to her brother, and then made a gesture towards the floor and inarticulately said, "Naïf." Everyone was stunned, rushed to brace and hugged the girl. Amanda slipped quietly from the table in the midst of the commotion. Let her relatives stay together. Without her, no one would notice her absence. And she needed to recover from the unexpected shock of discovery. The man of her dreams, her mysterious night visitor, and Carl's son were one and the same person. She was shaking all over with confusion. At the table, it was soon discovered that Elizabeth's carer and her doctor, who had brought such a joyous event to the house, had gone somewhere. Harry was sent in search of her, and he knocked insistently on the door of the house physician, then opened it a little, but found nothing in the room but the sound of water running in the bath. Deciding that the woman might have been taken ill, the man pushed the bathroom door resolutely open. Above the bathtub, bent over, Amanda was furiously rubbing some kind of cloth, dropping tears into the water. She turned round at the noise of the door opening. She wasn't wearing her ugly glasses now. Her hair was loose down her back, and Harry caught a glimpse of something very familiar about her. Then he moved his eyes to the bathtub where a beautiful dark blue silk dress lay. The puzzle came together. You? Harry shrieked in surprise, and I came back with champagne, provisions, a bouquet of flowers to your flat, but it was empty. I almost went mad with despair. I thought I'd lost my night fairy forever. Amanda boldly stepped into his open arms. To hell with all principles, decency, rules. This man had turned her soul upside down yesterday. People on this earth meet and get to know each other in different ways. She feels good with him. The rest doesn't matter. Harry let the girl out first. Quickly put something on. It's only 5 minutes until the chimes strike. We'll make it in time. There was no time for the usual masquerade. Amanda's blouse and skirt were all wet. She pulled on her tight jeans and white jumper in a matter of seconds. Didn't bother to brush her hair. They arrived at the table as the chimes struck. Champagne bubbles were playing in the glasses. Vanessa's culinary creations were waiting on the table. Even Elizabeth tried to put a semblance of a smile on her face. Carl did not ask his son a single question, only glanced at the young people seated at the table next to him. Vanessa thought to herself, and with that, we'll soon have children's voices in our house again. Ashley smiled happily, stroking Tim's back. Gabriella was biting her lip nervously and chewing on a red fish sandwich. So I'll have Ashley stolen from me soon enough if I'm catching crows. Now I'll have to accept the gardener's advances if I'm to stay in this house and get more of a foothold. He's not a bad chap, he's kind and handy, and quite handsome. The New Year's Eve night was truly fairy tale and magical, just as it should have been. Everyone at the table was happy in his own way. The long-awaited winter holidays flew by in the midst of entertainment and rest. Only Amanda worked tirelessly with Elizabeth to consolidate her success. On his first day at work, Carl realized that he had relaxed too much over the weekend and decided to be home early. Quietly stepping on the soft carpeted walkway, he walked to the door of his daughter's room and witnessed Elizabeth's new victories. Nuff, Tima, Daddy, Harry, Vanessa, Ashley, Amanda. Gaby Elizabeth dutifully repeated the syllables after Amanda. Carl rounded the corner of the corridor and cried. A panel appointed by Amanda's teacher 10 days later gave a reassuring summary the disease had subsided. The process of cell and tissue destruction had slowed down. The remission period had already exceeded all known scientific limits. Carl, I told you Amanda is an excellent specialist. In our case, expecting a full recovery is a bit of a stretch. But your daughter has shown marked improvement in her general condition. She's starting to react to the outside world. Weakly, not much, but she's starting to talk again. You know, I was thinking, if the patient lives surrounded by angels of goodness, as my student characterized it to me, he has every chance to stay on this earth for some more time, and you will make him as happy as possible for her. I am sure of it. 6 months have passed. The plane leaving on the morning flight to Prague was delayed due to weather conditions. The cute young couple kept glancing at the electronic board and at each other. Harry, what if I hadn't gone to that ill-fated nightclub then? You would have seen me in the image of a monster and would not pay attention to me, asked the mum-to-be, with a rather noticeable rounded tummy. Come on. The man answered her, adjusting his wedding ring on his finger. I would have seen you through all your disguises. Your angelic soul, your ability to do good cannot be hidden. I'd fall for such radiant magic. The iron, monotonous voice of the announcer announced the boarding of their flight. The couple hugged each other and slowly walked towards the boarding point. We will finish all my business in Prague now. You will see this beautiful city and we will hurry to our home. Elizabeth, do you know what she gave me before we left? Harry, Amanda, Elizabeth, Tim is waiting. It's a puzzle. We can't let them all down. Without us, the circle of good angels would be incomplete. Shara was half reclining on a comfortable chair in the corner of the dressing room. Her friend and colleague Edith was on the armrest. Grace was sitting opposite on a swivel chair. She was telling the girls a story about an obsessive admirer who met her every morning at the entrance with a bouquet of flowers. He's so serious, Grace said, amused. His eyes are sad, but there's so much hope in them. Sometimes he doesn't say anything, and sometimes he starts to declare his love, and I'm so proud I pass him by. Are you not afraid? Edith asked, recognizing her. Where do you live? Every day you are haunted by a crazy man. Her friend's assumption caused Grace to laugh. He's like Raleigh or something. He's here on the dance floor right now, waiting for us to come out. And yet I'd be careful, he's a queer fellow. Edith shook her head vigilantly. Come on, Grace grinned. He's kind of funny. All the girls were dressed in short shorts and rhinestone tops. Their long hair was loose, and they wore eye-catching makeup on their faces. The girls worked as dancers in a local club, performing to warm up the audience on high platforms. Calypso's guests welcomed the three beauties, especially the male part of the club's visitors. How did Shara end up here? It's simple. She came to the audition when she saw an advertisement at the bus stop, requiring dancers for an evening show. The girl naively thought at first that it was a kind of concert hall. She knew how to dance, could dance, and loved it. Her childhood was spent in a large village with the beautiful name of Accord. There was a 2-story children's arts center on the central square, and it was in this center that Shara had been choreographing for as long as she could remember. At first, her mother and grandmother took turns taking her to classes. Then Shara grew up and got there on her own. Gradually, she joined the dance group. The girls performed at all holidays in Accord and even traveled to the city for competitions. Often they returned as winners, bringing back cups, medals, and certificates. Friendship, adventure, rehearsals, performances. It was a bright, saturated life. Shara adored dancing and did not see herself as anything but a professional dancer, until she realized that her abilities, although certainly not bad, were far from perfect. At large regional and district competitions, Shara saw girls of her age who could do things that she herself had never dreamed of. And her mother was against such a career. She set her daughter up for a serious profession. Well, you probably don't have enough brains to become an engineer or a lawyer, do you? My mother argued with offensive candor. But there are other options. I was looking for a food technologist or a marketing specialist, for example. Her mother was right. Shara's school grades left much to be desired, mostly weak C's. In physical education, of course, a solid A, the impact of many years of choreography, but the rest. Well, the girl had no heart for science. She liked to dance. In her dance group, she was one of the best, but still not good enough to compete with young dancers in regional competitions. What to say about a higher level? When the time came, her mother and stepfather decided everything for Shara. They paid for her commercial education at the Faculty of Food Processing Technology. They rented an apartment near the university and sent her away from home with a light heart. Shara knew that everyone was happy to see her go, because ever since her mother had married Matthew, Shara had always felt like an extra. It was like she was getting in the way of their enjoyment of each other, distracting them with her learning problems and sometimes behavior at school. When Shara was 9 years old, Abby, her baby sister, was born. It became clear that the reserved and cold Matthew could be a wonderful father, tender, caring, attentive. The mother, too, had melted into the little girl. Shara watched them cooing over little Abby, and her heart ached because all she got were comments, heavy sighs, irritation. No, her mother and stepfather were kind of trying for Shara. They were really doing a lot for her future, hiring tutors, buying nice clothes, and planning deliciously for their eldest daughter's future. But it's all kind of on duty, just because it has to be. Mother and Matthew's heart belonged to little Abby. Her smile immediately made them smile and delighted. The only talk in the house was about the new skills and amazing abilities of the little girl. Years passed. Abby grew up, nothing changed. She was just some kind of a perfect child, obeying her parents, loving to read, trying to help her mom and dad in everything. And when Abby went to school, it turned out that she was also smart. The girl brought home only A's, exclusively. Shara loved her little sister, too. Abby really was a wonderful person, sensitive, kind, and fun. But to feel like an extra in your own home was really hard. And that's exactly how Shara felt. Dancing was the girl's only salvation on stage. In the circle of her favorite friends, Shara forgot all her sorrows. Music and clear movements invariably lifted her spirits. The applause of the appreciative audience drew her away. Except that one far from beautiful day, some businessman bought the children's center, and the club turned into a dairy. New jobs appeared in accord, well-paid ones, by the way. Some sections and clubs were transferred to local schools. But Shara's dance group broke up. They needed bigger halls, mirrors, a stage. Shara felt this moment hard. The only thing that filled her life with energy and joy was gone. No more rehearsals, no more walks with the girls after practice, no more road shows. It's all for the best, her mother exhorted. She had no way of understanding her eldest daughter, nor did she try to. You're probably already in your senior year of high school. You'll be entering soon. You can't spend all day and night doing frivolous things. It's time to start studying. Matthew, who was always on his mother's side, joined in. We'll pay for you to study at the commercial department of food processing. Your task is to study at least for C's, so as not to drop out. When you come back, you'll get a job at our dairy. That's it. Her parents had already made up their minds for Shara, but she did not resist because she no longer had a dream to fight for. Her plans to become a great dancer were in the past. Shara felt that she was hindering her stepfather and mother, that without her, their family mom, dad, and little miracle daughter would become more harmonious and happy. So when the time came, the girl happily flew out of the nest. A new life, new acquaintances, bright impressions were waiting for her. Her stepfather transferred money to Shara's card twice a month, which was enough only for groceries, but the girl could not complain. She realized that her parents were not millionaires to provide her with a comfortable life. They already had to pay for her studies and rent. But there were so many interesting things in the city: movies, cafes, stores with beautiful clothes, nightclubs. All these pleasures were not cheap. And Shara, of course, couldn't afford much. She needed money. Studying didn't take much time and effort. My mother was right. The commercial department of a not very prestigious faculty didn't demand anything supernatural from its students. The main thing was not to miss lectures and attend all seminars. That's why Shara gradually formed a clear idea in her head: she needed a job. She can study and work part-time in the evenings. Waitress, saleswoman, animator, caterer. There were plenty of jobs for students in the big city. The girl methodically wrote them out in a notebook. In the end, she had an impressive list, some of which would definitely fit. And that ad recruiting girls for a dance show it came across by accident. Fate, no less. Of course, Shara couldn't ignore it. The girl immediately dialed the number indicated in the ad. She was listened to and invited to the casting. Shara arrived at the appointed time at Club Calypso. It was 3 p.m. The deserted dance floor looked really huge. Shara was even confused at first. A scowling security guard escorted her to the dressing room. There she was given a strange costume that looked more like a swimsuit than a dance outfit. A silver skirt that looked like a wide belt, a tiny top. The girl who issued the costume realized everything by the surprised face of the young dancer. "So you don't know where you've come either?" she asked. "I told you that you should make a proper announcement. You're already so fifth. You're gonna leave now. Too bad you've got the right data, huh?" "What's the job?" Shara decided to ask after all. It turned out that they needed girls for club dances, slim young ladies who could move beautifully. When the degree of fun drops on the dance floor, the girls are released on the high platform, and they add energy and mood to the evening. "Will I be wearing clothes?" Shara asked. The girl laughed. "Of course, this is a decent establishment. Yes, the dancers' costumes are revealing enough to attract attention, but it's only dancing. And we have good security here. They make sure there are no misunderstandings." Shara thought about it and agreed to give it a try. After all, it was her long-forgotten dream to dance in front of an audience. Besides, the salary offered was more than good. You can't earn so much as a waitress. And the Club Calypso really is a serious place. As a last resort, if you don't like something, you can always leave. That's how Shara became a dancer. 2 other girls joined her at Calypso. At first, the choreographer showed the newcomers Edith's basic moves. Grace and Shara quickly understood what was required of them, and the choreographer was satisfied. "It's nothing complicated," smiled the man, who was a fairly famous dancer in the past. "I showed you the base, and then you improvise, move to the music, show yourself. You are beautiful, graceful. Just nymphs. The public will love you." At first, Shara was shy to go under the spotlight. She realized that everyone was looking at her. But then, looking at her friends dancing selflessly. The girl was drawn in, relaxed. Now she felt on her platform, like a fish in water, watching. Well and great, they admire, and there is something to admire. Slender, trim figure, long legs, shiny dark hair, beautifully flowing over elegant shoulders, huge eyes, black eyebrows, plump, almost like Angelina Jolie lips. Shara had once been shy of them as a child. Some of her classmates had even teased her with sticky fish. Now these girls themselves ran to cosmetology to inject fillers. As time passed, Shara began to enjoy her work. She liked to delight. During the dance, she felt like a queen above the crowd, because the girls' platforms were high enough so that they could not be reached by obsessive admirers, and the young nymphs certainly had admirers. The girls' safety was strictly monitored by 2 strong, pumped-up guys. The place was a serious nightclub Calypso, not a cheap eatery, and not the 3rd disrupted bar, but incidents still happened. Some club guests managed to achieve their goal of making their way to the girl they liked, and that's what happened to Grace. A young guy who happened to be in the club one day saw her and apparently fell in love. Followed the girl home in the morning, got her address. So now he meets her every morning with flowers. Grace laughs, but if it were Shara, she'd be wary. There's no telling what this guy has in mind. And how did he track Grace down? The club's employees were leaving the club in the morning through a different building entirely, the one next door. That's surprising. Maybe he bribed one of the guards. Still, Shara felt a little sorry for the guy. He must have grace in his heart to be waiting for her at the door. And flowers aren't cheap these days. Maybe he's spending his last dime on a bouquet for EVA. Everything's funny to her. Shara also had an admirer who knew more about her than he should, and he was nothing like the poor, humble guy who'd been keeping Grace in line. He was a grown man, mature and very wealthy. David owned a chain of high-end restaurants in their town. He was in his early 40s. Tall, athletic, fit, well-groomed, always stylishly and tastefully dressed, incredibly charismatic and charming. Her friends were even a little jealous of Shara because of the fact that David paid attention to her. Usually the guards suppressed the girl's communication with the guests of the club. But this time the owner of the club approached Shara and, a little stammering, proposed to meet. "One of our guests really likes you, a VIP guest. He wants to talk to you, just to talk to you. If you don't mind, I'll tell him, he'll understand. It's just that he's a powerful man." Shara realized that this was something very serious. The club owner himself was almost making excuses for her now. She felt a little scared, and at the same time curious as to what kind of important figure was paying attention to her. Who was he, this person who made the master embarrassed in front of her and an ordinary dancer? Yes, and to Ciara's ego, this is a very big power. That's how irresistible she is, since she got such a man hooked. Anyway, Ciara then gave her consent to the meeting, which caused the joy of the boss. David came straight to her dressing room. So handsome, so strong. He was not distinguished by aggregates, muscles and pumped-up torso, but nevertheless made an impression of a very strong and confident man. The man looked over Ciara with interest, who had already managed to change out of her dance costume for blue ripped jeans and a stretchy t-shirt. David is mesmerizing. Really? Could this man be her admirer? Until now, the guards had been chasing away the boys who'd fallen in love with the pretty dancer, and now suddenly she had a man like this. David settled into the chair across from Ciara and smiled at her. The girl's confusion seemed to add to it. "Why are you so risky?" He finally broke the silence. "You look so different on the stage." Ciara smiled embarrassedly, her eyes downcast in a childish way that she couldn't quite figure out how she felt. This man, he was both intimidating and alluring at the same time. David took the initiative. He had mastered the art of negotiation. Ciara didn't notice how relaxed she was. The man asked the girl about her life and hobbies, so that she wanted to tell him everything. He listened attentively and made appropriate remarks. Once in a while, Ciara ventured to ask him questions too. He answered straightforwardly, without prevarication. So Ciara learned that David owned a restaurant business and was therefore a very rich man. He also had a wife and children. The man did not even try to hide it, as well as the fact that he really liked Ciara. He offered her to be with him together to travel, to spend time, to communicate. "You're very beautiful," David said, looking straight into her eyes. These words from his lips had an incredible effect on the girl. She felt goosebumps run down her back, her palms grew cold, and the blood clung to her cheeks. "I'd really like to get to know you better, but I can see you're not ready yet. Am I right?" Of course he was right. David seemed to know everything in the world. Ciara nodded cautiously. "Well, I won't rush you," David smiled. "But no one will stop me from coming and admiring you. You don't mind, do you?" Of course, Ciara didn't mind. She realized that she would be dancing just for him from now on, and would search for David with her eyes among the crowd. He frightened her with his power. A voice with a slight hoarseness, the scent of elite perfume, mixed with the smell of expensive cigarettes. It all made the girl's head spin. But something kept Ciara from taking a counter step. She needed to think it over. David is married. He offers her to be his mistress. It's not an enviable role. After all, Ciara was raised in a traditional household, and all her neighbors were the same. Such liaisons were frowned upon in their village. And it was scary to be in the hands of such a powerful man. Now the final step has not yet been taken. David is keeping his distance, giving her a choice. Will Ciara have a choice later? That's the question. David was gone, and Ciara began a time of anguish and torment. At night, lying in her bed, she imagined David, trying to figure out where he was, what he was doing. Maybe he was generalizing another young beauty or working. Was he thinking about her? Or was her indecision the end of a relationship that had never really begun? The next day was Ciara's day off. She didn't go to the club, but on Saturday she was performing. Ciara danced on her platform and desperately hoped that David could see her now. She was trying for him, just for him, and David could see her. When Ciara returned to her dressing room, she found a bouquet of scarlet roses on her dressing table with a note from him. The man expressed his admiration for the young dancer and compared her to a lovely, graceful nymph. That would make anyone dizzy. David often came to the club. When Ciara noticed him in the VIP area, her heart began to beat faster. The man sent her gifts, a bouquet of flowers, a bottle of expensive wine, a dainty bracelet. Sometimes he showed up himself. Ciara always waited for these meetings. He sat in the dressing room in the chair opposite the girl. They talked. David looked at Ciara interested. In his eyes read admiration and passion. David waited patiently for a sign from the girl, and this attracted Ciara even more, but she still did not dare. Her friends called her stupid for it. Such a man, I shook my head dreamily. Grace, not like my begrudging admirer with the bouquets. If I were you, I wouldn't doubt it for a moment, said Edith. I wish I had been so fortunate. Try harder. Maybe you'll make it, said Grace. No, I've got the same beggarly students as you. Edith was not indebted. Shara had her doubts. Something kept her from becoming a lover. David has a wife after all, and he is pursuing her, a young dancer. This says a lot about both the man's moral character and his non-serious attitude towards her. However, all this became unimportant when David sat down in the chair opposite Shara and looked at her with his deep dark eyes, mesmerizing as a rabbit's boa constrictor. Shara realized that she was just a pretty trophy to him. David would play with her quickly and find a new object. And she was just a difficult prey to heat up the hunting excitement. Yes, Shara was aware of all that. And at the same time, she knew she couldn't resist for long. David had an almost magical effect on her. Shara found it increasingly difficult to control herself. His look, his voice, his palms, his lips. The girl had no strength left to resist. Good job keeping it together, the costumer. A woman in her 40s, said to Shara. The minute you go along with David, it's all gone. How many of them I've seen, first one, then another, then a third. But you're a good girl, you've got guts. With a pivot. If that woman knew what kind of dreams Shara was having with David. But the costumer's words betrayed for a while that her detached demeanor was the best strategy for dealing with the situation. The parents didn't know what their daughter did for a living. Shara didn't tell them she danced. They wouldn't have understood, would have thought their daughter was a disgrace to their pious family. If nothing else, they would have taken her back to the village out of harm's way. Once again, Shara would have to feel like the fifth wheel on the cart. And of course her mother and stepfather knew nothing about David or Shara's new lifestyle. They generally preferred to keep their distance. The three of them seemed to be doing well together. And time passed. Gradually, Shara began to realize that she was losing herself. At first, the dancing, the club, the nightlife, the admirers all seemed like a bright adventure. But then the girl began to feel some strange desolation. Rattling music, cigarette smoke, booze being a river, sticky stares, flashing lights, and David. David, who was getting more and more insistent and assertive. Shara's partners changed one after another. First, Edith's parents found out who their daughter worked for, showed up at her house and made her scandalized and forced her to quit. Then Grace unexpectedly married that funny fan with flowers. He turned out to be reliable, faithful, and genuinely in love. Grace appreciated all this to the fullest. The girls were quickly replaced. The new girls danced just as well, but Shara couldn't make friends with them. Maybe she just didn't want to. The girl drank a lot now, and somehow she became addicted to the energy cocktails served at the Calypso bar. They gave her strength, lifted her mood, and made her gloomy thoughts disappear. Everything seemed to be going well for Shara. She was dancing and earning money, and not bad money at that, and she was studying at the university in parallel. She even had a wealthy admirer. Shara knew that if she asked, David would do a lot for her. Nothing seemed to be impossible for this man. It was true that every request had its price, but it was no longer important. And yet Shara's soul felt a kind of hopeless longing. She wanted to be like before, full of hopes for a new interesting life. Modest, a little shy. But after more than a year of dancing in front of hundreds of people, it is difficult to return to the past, to the present. One day Shara decided to quit. She came with an application to the owner of Calypso, but he offered her twice the salary because Shara was so well received by the audience. So the girl stayed. It was true what they say, everything in the world has its price, even her, Shara. That evening the girl was coming home from university. Tomorrow was the exam. There was a counseling session today. Shara hadn't prepared anything for it. She already had an envelope with the right amount of money on her shelf. Working at Calypso gives her the opportunity to not waste time on unnecessary studying. Her parents, looking at their daughter's credit card, were overjoyed. They thought Shara had finally gotten smart. They did not suppose that 70% of these marks the girl just bought. It was hard to deceive them, but Shara had no close relations with her mother. And then there's David. He asked Shara to fly to the Dominican Republic for the vacations. A paradise, a luxury resort. A week alone with David, away from all the worries and heavy thoughts. It was the reboot Shara needed. There was no strength to resist David, And she didn't want to. What did she have to lose? So everyone's fooled, so why not make the most of this situation and enjoy it? And what happens next? Who cares? The girl was distracted from her gloomy thoughts by a frightened cry. The weak, trembling voice was full of despair. Shara turned to the sound and was stunned. Pressed against the wall of the house was an old woman, thin, small, with a plaid tropical bag in her hands. Her eyes were full of terror, for a huge dog was coming at her, growling menacingly. The dog must have smelled the meat the old woman was carrying home from the market. As luck would have it, no one was around. The big dog, smelling a weak victim, was preparing to attack. Shara, without thinking, grabbed a stick lying at her feet. Shouted loudly, "The beast," and went right at him. The dog was confused. He felt the strength and determination of his opponent. Besides, he was very embarrassed by the stick. He decided not to mess with the humans and ran away. The old woman, pale as a sheet, looked at the dog. She couldn't believe her unexpected rescue. Shara stepped closer to her. "Are you all right?" "It's okay, honey. It's okay. Thank you so much. I thought he was going to kill me. How did you not freak out?" Shara shrugged her shoulders. In the village, she'd often seen people fending off dogs. It was usually enough to hold something in their hands and show their confidence. Dogs are afraid of that. Such a beautiful girl, thin, young, and not afraid. Continued to admire the old woman. And they also say that men are the stronger sex. Shara smiled. She was pleased by this old woman's gratitude. She felt strong and good and kind next to her. A wonderful feeling. "I want to thank you," the stranger continued. "Don't do that," the girl protested. "It wasn't hard for me. It wasn't hard for me, and it's what anyone would have done in my place." "Not any of them," the old woman shook her head. "You have a heart of gold. Still, I want to thank you. I have something that seems to have been specially made for you, and I don't need it." This was where Shara was already torn with curiosity. What was this thing? "Shall we go?" The old woman smiled, noticing the hesitation of her interlocutor. "I live not far from here, in the next house." Shara didn't follow the old woman up to the apartment. It's not a big deal. There were so many stories about young girls disappearing. Still, she couldn't trust a stranger 100%. The old woman understood everything and was not offended. On the contrary, she praised her companion for her vigilance. The elderly woman was gone for about 5 minutes, and then she came out to Shara with a small scroll in her hands. The thing this grandmother was talking about was carefully wrapped in wrapping paper. "Here you go," she smiled, holding out the gift to Shara. "It's like it was made especially for you. It's amazing. It doesn't even look like that." The girl untied the rope in impatience, unfolded the paper, and could not restrain a surprised sigh. How could such a thing be possible? It was a painting, painted in colors, small, a little larger than a standard photograph, and yet all the details on it were written out with amazing precision and clarity. Shara, gazing into this creation, became more and more amazed, because the painting was of herself, while working at the club apparently, one of her arms reaching upward, her back leaned back slightly, long hair spread across her shoulders. Only instead of the usual mini shorts, skirts, the artist drew on her an exquisite light dress on thin straps, as if shining from within. Like a princess from a fairy tale, the image was completed with a thin tiara. Shara recognized herself. It was her face, her eyes, her eyebrows, her lips, her bracelet on her arm. Leather, wide, made up of an interweaving of thin bags. She bought it once in a gift shop. Inexpensive, but a favorite piece of jewelry. Darkness reigned around the heroine of the painting, lightly scattered by starlight. "It looks like you," the old woman smiled. "That's why I thought you should have it. It's one of my favorite paintings, but it suits you better, by God." "Where did you get this?" Shara finally found her voice. "Brandon gave it to me. The artist rented my apartment for a long time. Now he's been gone a couple months, but he comes to visit me sometimes. I used to treat him like my own grandson. I don't have any of my own, and Brandon's used to working. His family is strict and cold, so he melted and got attached to me. He painted so many pictures for me, Landscapes, still lifes, and even my portrait, and he often paints this princess. She's dancing, or just sitting on the shore, or smiling. It's beautifully drawn. It's very beautiful. He's a talent, and he's appreciated. He is. That's why he moved out, isn't it? He got some money, so he bought an apartment in the center with a picturesque view of the river. She's a princess, or a mermaid, or a nymph, or just an ordinary girl. How many times have I wondered who that is? I thought maybe it was his favorite girl. But he jokes away. I saw her in a dream, he says, that's all. You can't get a word out of him anymore. Amazing story. That's right. And you look a lot like this girl. Practically a portrait of you. That's why I'm giving you this painting. Shara smiled, thanked the old woman, and headed home. She spent the rest of the evening admiring the painting, becoming more and more convinced that she was the one depicted in it. And the facial features and figures, and even the movement in which the girl froze. Everything matched. Except for the costume, of course. Shara had never worn such beautiful long dresses and tiaras, but everything else was identical. There was no doubt about it. This mysterious artist Brandon, that's what the old lady had called him. He must have seen her at the club. During the dance, probably the movements from her dance and the painter depicted in his painting. And it should happen that the work was in her hands quite by chance. It was mystical. Looking at the portrait, Shara tried to imagine its creator. She knew it was a fairly young man. The old woman had said she treated him like a grandson. So Brandon is about Shara's age, or slightly older. He's also clearly a very talented guy. How accurately he captured Shara's movements. And the details. The artist didn't even forget to label the tiny mole on her shoulder. Maybe he saw it more than once. Maybe he even went to the club on purpose to get a better look at the dancer who looked like her. But he was seriously hooked. According to the old lady, Brandon often made the girl the heroine of his paintings. Shara hesitated for a moment. Wow. Apparently she has other devoted fans besides David. Except Brandon never showed himself in any way. He remained invisible to Shara. Remembering David, Shara wondered. Dominica, a reliable, strong man by her side. A wonderful week ahead. But then what? He'd go back to his wife and kids, and she'd remain in mistress status. They'll see each other occasionally. David, of course, won't begrudge her attention and gifts. Shara will have some luxury, expensive things. Maybe he'll even buy her a car and an apartment. But that's not certain, of course. And then David would get bored quickly. Shara knew that. The girl understood perfectly well that it was her aloofness and inaccessibility that caught the man's eye. What about her? Did she love David herself? Any feelings? Shara felt it for the man for sure. He drew her in with his strength and confidence. Determined and successful, almost omnipotent. And he looks at her, an ordinary student, a dancer, a girl from the village, as if she were a deity. It's not a fact that this look is sincere. David is experienced, mature, intelligent. He knows how to act to get his way. And yet, realizing all of this, Shara still reached for David. It was a strange, confusing situation. Shara wanted love, warmth, care, all of which she didn't get at home. In David's strong, reliable embrace, the girl would feel needed and protected at least for a while, and even, perhaps, could convince herself that it was not an illusion. And then, it was that later that made the girl hesitate and doubt. David would leave her. He would return to his family, find a new object. Would Shara be able to cope with his departure? Would she be able to take it? Suddenly, this painting is like a message from a secret admirer. Shara really seems to have aroused strong feelings in him. He portrayed her as more than just a beautiful demigoddess. Only someone truly in love could look at her like that. It's a shame that Brandon's in the shadows. He may have tried to get through to her, but the guards wouldn't let him. Not everyone is as powerful as David. Shara was suddenly very eager to get to know him, this artist for whom she had become a muse. To see what he looked like, to hear the young man's voice, to talk to him, and look into his eyes, only how to find Brandon in this huge city. The old lady said the artist had managed to buy himself an apartment in the center overlooking the river. Shara knew nothing more about him, only his name and approximate place of residence. That's a bit small, isn't it? I wish I knew Brandon's last name. Then it would be possible to scour social networks or artist forums. But as it is, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Of course, we could go back to the old lady, ask her more about the young man. Maybe she knows his address, but it's awkward. And anyway, they'll see each other. And then what? She imagined that the guy was in love, and he might not be free at all. Ciara's thoughts were interrupted by a call from David. They had agreed to call tonight. The man should explain how to issue a passport. The trip to the paradise corner of the earth was just around the corner. David became more insistent. He came to Ciara's dressing room more and more often, sat closer to her, and even allowed himself to put his arm around her waist, which had never happened before. More and more often, Ciara felt like David's thing. In a way, it was even pleasant. Next to him, she didn't have to decide anything, only obey his orders. On the other hand, it was overwhelming, but Ciara couldn't push him away, couldn't refuse him. They were going on a trip, and there was already a special relationship between them. It would be a little while before they became serious. Ciara's heart was heavy. She felt like she was making a mistake by getting closer to David. This relationship would change her, and it would change her irrevocably. Booze was a good way to drown out the painful thoughts. There was more and more of it in Ciara's life. A glass of wine before bed, weekends at the bar with a beer. This trend was starting to stress Ciara out. On the other hand, everyone around her was acting the same way. And it was okay, sort of. It was an ordinary summer evening. Ciara was sitting at home, watching TV, eating ice cream, relaxing. Today was her day off. She didn't need to go to Calypso. Some acquaintances had invited her to a bar, but Ciara had declined. She wanted to be alone in peace and quiet. The loud music and the hum of people's voices was enough for her at work. Suddenly, it was as if some unknown force lifted her off the couch and forced her to pull on shorts and a t-shirt. She was going downtown. Yes, a great idea to walk alone along the waterfront. She'd look at the houses, one of which appeared to be where the very same Brandon lived. The painting now had a place of honor in the apartment, standing on Ciara's nightstand. Every time she woke up, she saw herself in the image of a beautiful princess and smiled. She felt warm and light at heart. Someone sees her with such eyes, it means that she is not indifferent to this someone. Despite a weekday evening, the center was crowded. Parents with small children, couples in love, and teenagers on scooters strolled along the embankment. There was always a festive atmosphere here. Ciara walked along the embankment. On her right there was a parapet, behind which flowed a full-flowing river. On the other bank there was a huge park, overgrown with tall trees. Pleasure boats with vacationers sailed along the river. On the left side of the street stood out 5-story houses. They were quite new, recently built, but not typical high-rise buildings in the form of stone boxes, but buildings with fanciful balconies, galleries, and passages. Ciara knew it was high-end housing. The passerby was really starting to make good money from his paintings if he could afford to buy an apartment in a place like this. Ciara decided to walk next to the houses. Clean yards, spacious parking lots, a sports field. Behind the new buildings one could see old houses by which one could study the history of the city. Stucco patterned shutters, columns. Ciara involuntarily admired the old buildings. Now some organizations were located here, and once upon a time, merchants and artisans lived in these houses. Ciara's attention was suddenly drawn to the archway leading to the courtyard. I wonder what the girl was prepared to see there. Some old monument or fountain. But it was the walls of the archway itself that caught Ciara's attention. They were painted from bottom to top, and not just primitive drawings or graffiti, but images that clearly came out from under the feet of real artists. Beasts, fairy tale characters, heroes of famous movies and cartoons, wise sayings written in beautiful fonts. Ciara looked at this chronicle in admiration. What an extraordinary place. Her eyes blurred with the abundance of drawings. She wanted to look at everything, absolutely everything, without missing a single detail. And then Ciara saw herself again. On the round, yellow surface of the moon, a girl with long dark hair, beautiful and sad, danced barefoot against the black of space. And again the same leather bracelet on her wrist, her favorite. She was still wearing it now. The girl's breath caught. This drawing was made by him, Brandon. The guy lives somewhere nearby and probably drew it just recently. The paint is still bright, fresh. The girl couldn't resist. She took an eyebrow pencil out of her bag and left a signature next to the picture. I've seen it. It's very beautiful. Only I'm not like that. Ciara returned home in a strange mood. On the one hand, she was happy to discover another piece of news from the mysterious Brandon, and to see that she did indeed hold some place in his heart and thoughts. On the other, it was even harder now. Because after what had happened, she didn't want to see David at all. A relationship with him now seemed even more wrong. Shara tried to imagine what Brandon looked like before she went to sleep. She might even have seen him at the club. She meant something to him, since Brandon drew her so often. The mother either died when he was very young, or her life was taken by an illness that developed after giving birth to an only child. The boy was raised by his father, a sullen and busy man, and also his grandmother, his father's mother. The child knew no denial of anything since childhood. His only parent, Jaden Wright, was a successful entrepreneur. The man always dreamed that his son, when he grows up, will continue his business. Jaden Wright planned to leave his mini empire to his heir. But something went wrong. Brandon didn't live up to his father's expectations. From an early age, he was indifferent to his business. Talking about purchases, profits, stocks, subsidiaries made him sad. Jaden Wright was angry, enrolled his son in financial literacy courses and economic schools. But Brandon was always there, in the ranks of the laggards, and the boy did not try to delve into all these wisdoms. His favorite pastime was drawing. From an early age, he drew on everything he could get his hands on: paper, books, refrigerator doors, and of course wallpaper. At the same time, from under the hands of the kid came out not the usual for such age scribbles, and quite good drawings. Then the boy had albums, as well as paints, pencils, and felt tip pens. His drawings improved day by day. Everyone who saw them admired them and advised Jaden Wright to send his son to art school. But he just dismissed it. He considered drawing a dabble, something not serious. The man planned to develop his son in another direction. As a teenager, Brandon could stay in his room 24 hours a day. In his sketchbook appeared fantasy worlds, evil trolls, beautiful princesses, courageous heroes. Drawing, the boy forgot about everything and about lessons, and about the need to go to school, and even about food. Drawing absorbed him completely. He didn't need anything. Nothing else interested him at such moments. And if it hadn't been for his grandmother, who had almost forcibly torn his grandson out of his familiar world, Brandon wouldn't have left his room at all. But Emily was relentless. She made sure that her grandson did his homework, ate on time, and attended all the classes and clubs that Jaden Wright had chosen for him. Emily and her son were practical, savvy, goal-oriented people. Brandon's creative nature was alien to them, and it is unclear what caused conflicts and frustrations. Brandon's mother would have shared his hobbies. She herself was very good at drawing. Jaden Wright still kept his wife's drawings, which she sometimes gave him. It was a transfer to paper of song lyrics that both spouses liked. Brandon loved looking at these drawings. To him, they were like a connection to the mom he never knew. It made him feel good to know that he looked like her. Years passed. Jaden Wright had almost given up on his failed son. Brandon was not the kind of heir one might dream of. Weak, unsportsmanlike, withdrawn. Doesn't understand his father's business and doesn't even want to know about it. He is always in the clouds, socializing with losers like himself. He doesn't think about the future, but Brandon was not much different from the sons of Jaden Wright's acquaintances. Children of rich fathers really rarely think about the future. They already know that everything will be fine. And Brandon, against the wishes of his grandmother and father, continued to develop his talent. At the age of 13, he enrolled in art school, constantly participated in some competitions and even won prizes. Jaden Wright did not particularly delve into this hobby of his son. It was not interesting to him and seemed useless. Then Brandon began to earn money. He was already painting quite professionally, and there were people willing to pay for his paintings, albeit small, but quite real money, and then more. Brandon mastered computerized drawing. He got orders. Digital illustrations were in demand in publishing houses. They were used for website design, advertising, and so on. Jaden Wright wondered how it was that his son had really learned to earn money by drawing. Really, what kind of income is there? Just pennies for pocket change. But it was his own. After high school, Brandon enrolled at the Art Institute. Although Jaden Wright had already made arrangements with the right people, and his son was expected at the prestigious Faculty of Economics. But the boy was adamant he was not interested in economics. He was not going to become the head of his father's business. I have a different way, Brandon tried to convey to his parents. What's the path there? And Jaden Wright didn't understand it. You can't make a lot of money with pictures. You're the one with the wind in your head now, and then you'll realize you were wrong. But it'll be too late. In the end, I did it my way. He was a tough character, despite his fragile exterior. And then Brandon left home altogether. Said he needed quiet and solitude. It made it easier for him to create. His father tried to offer his stubborn son money, at least for the first time. His heart was troubled for Brandon. Jaden Wright thought his son was not adapted to life, but he refused, saying that he had been earning money for a long time. The landlady accepted the young guest as her own. She was lonely. Her husband had died long ago, and God had not given them any children, so she took Brandon as her favorite grandson. Pancakes in the morning, borscht, knitted socks. The old woman enveloped the boy with comfort and attention, like a warm blanket, and it was pleasant to take care of this talented young man. Brandon did the same for Harper Clark. He carried her heavy bags from the store, helped her move furniture, repaired the faucet. He had never felt so completely accepted by his family. Brandon had high expectations that the boy couldn't and wouldn't meet. Here he was loved and accepted for who he was. Harper Clark sincerely admired the boy's work. She spent hours looking at his paintings, sometimes even gasped, not believing that such works could come out of the hands of such a young man. Brandon painted several landscapes for Harper Clark and even drew her portrait. The old woman hung it in the most prominent place on the living room wall. Brandon created custom paintings and worked for his soul. He also developed in digital painting. This activity brought a good income. At the same time, Brandon had time to study at the Art Institute, where the basic fundamentals of painting were given, thanks to which the guy honed and perfected his talent. The capable artist soon had like-minded people, the same enthusiastic painters of all ages, and with a wide range of experience. Brandon communicated with talented people of his city, organized exhibitions together with them, took part in creative evenings, went on plein airs. He had friends artists from other countries. Communication with them took place via social networks and messengers. Brandon's work, much to his own surprise, became increasingly popular. He received orders from all over the world. Now the guy had to refuse many. His work capacity was amazing. He could not sleep or eat for 24 hours, carried away by another picture. Harper often had to drag the inspirational young man into the kitchen to keep him from starving to death. But there was more to Brandon's life than work and study. With new friends, he often walked around the city, went to nature, went to the movies. In general, did everything that other people his age do. These meetings, they were a kind of reboot, a source of inspiration. Adventures, new acquaintances, beautiful landscapes. All this gave birth to amazing subjects in Brandon's head, which the young man then transferred to the canvas. Brandon had fans who were not just fans of his work, but a fan of himself. Mia, a young waitress from the bar, a student who worked part-time in the evenings. Skinny, with short brown curls and a scattering of cute freckles on her nose. Brandon and his friends frequented this bar. If it was Mia's shift, she would rush to their table, leaving all the other customers behind, the girl looking only at Brandon. She was mesmerized by the young man's intelligent, dark eyes, in which some mysterious fire was constantly burning. She liked everything about him: appearance, movements, manner of dress, and most importantly his hands, narrow palms, long aristocratic fingers. Probably approximately so looked young Dorian Gray from the famous work of Oscar Wilde. The girl showed her affection for Brandon with all her appearance. It was impossible not to notice it. Mia smiled at him, looked into his eyes, and inadvertently tried to touch his hand. And anyone else would have lost their head by now. But Brandon, to Mia's great regret, he paid no attention to her. Once upon a time, back in high school, the guy had a crush on a classmate. They even had an affair right after graduation. Stormy, bright, beautiful. Only it ended in a trivial way. One day, Brandon happened to see Leslie on the street. She was making out with a brutal, pumped-up guy. The girl did not think to be embarrassed. Noticing Brandon, as if nothing had happened, she introduced him to her companion and said that she was going to him because she had fallen in love and lost her head. Friends warned Brandon right away that Leslie was twirling her tail. Too superficial, impulsive, and infantile. The girl lived bright emotions. During the months of communication with Brandon, and feelings dulled. So Leslie went for a new dose of adrenaline. Since then, Brandon went into creative work and seemed to have stopped thinking about his personal life altogether. All his time was spent painting, for the time being. until that amazing meeting in the most seemingly inappropriate place for such an event. So Brandon fully immersed himself in his work. The effect was corresponding to the guy got orders, money for his drawings of paintings and increased demand. The young artist could even afford to buy an apartment on the waterfront, which surprised his father, who thought his son was not capable of such a thing. This neighborhood has always attracted Brandon. Cozy, unusual, beautiful. And what were the views from the window of the full-flowing river? It's a great source of inspiration for artists. Sometimes Brandon visited Harper Clark. He was drawn to the warm, cozy atmosphere of her small apartment. The old lady always welcomed him with a happy smile and treated him to delicious home-cooked meals. His relatives and close people didn't understand him and constantly wanted to mold him into something else. It wasn't easy to feel his father's disappointment. The fateful meeting that so changed Brandon and his outlook on life took place on a Saturday night in February. One of the guy's buddies was having a birthday party. The birthday boy decided to celebrate at a nightclub. Not the best choice, in Brandon's opinion. The guy preferred other places of Rest Rock Bar in the city center, where local musicians gathered, cafeteria on the waterfront, a large apartment studio of one artist from their company. But the birthday boy wanted something new. Of course, Brandon had been to nightclubs before. Loud music, bright flashes of Edith and ending in strange dancing. People in different, blank faces, in different eyes, sometimes laughter, smiles, and always drinking rivers of beer, champagne, cocktails. Brandon himself didn't drink such beverages. They dulled his consciousness and gave him a headache. The guy preferred to stay sane at all times. Yes, and he saw what happens to creative people, exhaustive, inspiration in a bottle of sad history. Brandon was sitting at a table that night, indifferent to what was going on. His buddies had gone to the dance floor. Brandon was not in the mood. He was thinking about the plot of the next painting: dark sky, moon, stars, a riverbank, and crossed highlights on the surface of the water. And in the center of this landscape there had to be something beautiful. Something or someone. Something or someone. Something equally mesmerizing, harmonizing with the concept. Brandon couldn't decide what it could be. Graceful animals? A beautiful tree? The human image he was looking for just wouldn't come up. And then a romantic composition began to play. Brandon wasn't particularly fond of club music, but this one caught his ear. There was a tenderness in the melody, romantic. And all this was well combined with the bass, which added accents in the right places. Brandon noticed that the heads of those present were turned upward. He followed the people's gazes and marveled. He saw the most beautiful girl in the world. No, the guy had certainly met beauties before. He posed models, after all, a graceful figure and a cute face, and the purpose was not to surprise. But there was something particularly appealing about the girl dancing on the platform. Graceful movements, huge eyes. Even in the semi-darkness, Brandon noticed how beautifully they shone like two diamonds. The girl was dressed in short shorts, high boots, and a shiny top. At the same time, she did not look provocative. All her movements were strictly calibrated. She resembled a princess or a beautiful nymph dancing in the moonlight. Brandon realized who he would place in the center of the moonscape. It would be Shara, the young dancer. Everyone was admiring her. He tried to memorize every detail: the curve of her dark eyebrows, the proportions of her beautiful face, the shade of her long hair flowing down her graceful back and delicate shoulders. That evening, as soon as he got home, the boy went straight to work. By morning, the sketch was ready. Brandon admired his creation. Yes, indeed, everything turned out exactly as he wanted it to. A beautiful lunar landscape of John, a nymph, a princess, graceful, delicate creatures. Brandon hadn't recognized himself since. All he could think about was the beautiful stranger from the club. The boy then went to Calypso, and more than once admired the performance of the beautiful stranger, the heroine of one of his best paintings. The canvas now adorned the wall of his room, but the lad made many copies of various sizes. Several of them had already been sold for more than a good price. Brandon was drawn to this girl more and more, but she remained out of reach. He had heard her name accidentally, when a friend had called her once. Kiara was a wonderful name. It suited the young, beautiful creature as well as possible. Brandon realized he was in love. Probably for the first time in his life, his feelings for Leslie were nothing compared to what he felt now. Brandon wanted to hear the voice, to look into her eyes. He didn't know anything about this girl. but he had a good sense of people, and even from a great distance he realized that he and Kiara were made for each other. Only how to get close to her. She's always up there high up on the platform. Brandon realized he wouldn't dare approach her first. He'd never been a tough macho, but he didn't usually have trouble talking to people. But here he realized that if he'd been near Ciara, he wouldn't have been able to say a word out of excitement. She remained out of his reach. Beautiful, graceful, ethereal, distant and yet very close, almost kin. Brandon loved to visit Harper Clark. He liked the quiet, peaceful atmosphere of her small apartment. Every time the old woman was genuinely happy to see the former guest and tried to treat him to something homemade and tasty. Pies, pancakes, and borscht. Brandon would eat it all in both cheeks under Harper Clark's satisfied gaze. The guy gave her his paintings, and even once he drew a portrait of Harper Clark based on a photograph from his youth. She admired Brandon's work every time she saw it. "I can't believe a man can do that," she said, looking at his creations. That summer evening, Brandon came to Harper Clark's house again, bought her favorite candies at the supermarket, and went to visit. Sitting in the bright kitchen, Harper Clark in front of a plate of freshly fried, specially flavored pancakes for him. Brandon listened to the old lady's stories about her life. She had an argument with her neighbor, went to the clinic, the usual things, and suddenly, "Oh, I had an incident the other day." "I'm still reeling from it," Harper Clark admitted. "What is it?" Brandon looked up. "I'm walking home from the store tonight, and then, out of nowhere, a black dog jumps out at me. It's huge, angry, growling, coming towards me. I looked around and there's no one there, just like that. Well, that's it. I think I'm finished. The dog is rabid. Probably normal dogs don't attack people." The dog pushed the old woman back against the wall of the house. Harper Clark was retreating. When she felt the cold concrete against her back, she realized that there was nowhere else to go. She could only wait for the inevitable. Harper Clark's heart beat in her chest like a trapped bird. And there's a young girl, beautiful and very brave. She put her stick in her hands and attacked the dog. The dog smelled her strength, tucked his tail and ran away. My savior. The guardian angel must have sent her. There was no one else. Brandon smiled. The world was not without good people. He'd realized that a long time ago. "So I wanted to thank her," Harper Clark continued. "She didn't like it at first, but I told her I had something that looked like it was made for her." "And what is it?" Brandon wondered. "The painting is yours. I hope you're not offended. I gave her that princess who dances under the moon." Brandon nodded. He understood what it was about. A copy of his most successful painting, the one of Ciara. "Of course I don't mind," the boy assured me. "I gave it to you. You can do what you want with it. It feels good." Honestly. Just that girl, she looked just like the princess in the painting. Eyebrows and eyes and hair. Just as thin and beautiful. Similar? Brandon was wary. "Yeah, I thought there was no such thing. It's an amazing coincidence. When I got over the shock, I saw the resemblance right away, and I thought, wow, that's amazing." And her. And when she saw the painting, she was very surprised, and she looked at it for a long time, unable to believe it. And then she started asking me where I got the picture from, what kind of person painted it, and so on. "What about you?" And I answered all the questions I told you about you. Only it so happened that the pseudonym in his creative speech did not go. I guess we were both confused. Me because of that damn dog, because of the painting. Her portrait is as mesmerizing as hers. Brandon couldn't sleep for a long time that night, going over Harper Clark's story in his head. Really? Has she met Ciara? It was just a chance encounter on the street. And the painting that Brandon had been inspired by Ciara had fallen into her hands in such a strange way. Or was it just a girl who looked just like her? No, Brandon realized, sensed with some sixth sense, Ciara had the picture. She now knew she had a secret admirer. And of course the girl guessed that the artist had captured her in a dance, which meant he had seen Ciara at the club. Surely now the girl is thinking about him, wondering who he is, trying to imagine his appearance. Brandon assumed that since fate had made such an interesting move, now that something would shift in his relationship with Shara. But nothing had changed. He was still watching her from afar, from the dance floor. She would dance on the high platform and then disappear, always disappearing. Brandon had tried to watch for her outside the club many times, but he'd never seen her leave. Perhaps there was some other way out of the establishment, some secret door. Or maybe the employees left through the office building adjacent to the club. Brandon was disturbed by the growing sadness in Shara's eyes. He could see it even from a distance. Something was going on in the girl's life. Either she was facing a difficult choice or something bad had happened to her. Either way, she needed the support of a trustworthy man. Brandon was ready to help her. In fact, he wanted to, if only he had the opportunity to do so. It was a warm summer evening. The sun was beginning to sink, coloring the sky in matchless pastel tones of pink, purple, and blue. Brandon was working, painting another picture for a customer. The man decided to make a gift to his elderly mother to present then, and a landscape depicting the place where her childhood passed. Guy loved the order. Brandon worked with inspiration and pleasure. From time to time, he would glance out the window. The view of the waterfront always lifted his spirits. The vastness, the wide river, the smart people. A beautiful place. Today, it was crowded. The motley crowd flowed down the street like a full-blown stream. Suddenly, Brandon saw her. He could not be mistaken. He could not look at Shara. Because he had drawn her so many times, he had followed her movements so closely. Among the crowd of people, he noticed the girl who had become his muse, his inspiration and his dream. She looked very different from her performances. Her hair was in a high ponytail. On her feet, stompy sneakers. A light backpack on her shoulders. Shara was wearing jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. But Brandon recognized her. Of course he did. What was the likelihood that Shara would be passing by his windows just as he took his eyes off the canvas? Minimal. There was no way to pass up a chance like that. Brandon rushed to the window. Now he would swing it open and respond to Shara. What happens then? It doesn't matter. The main thing was to attract attention, to hold the girl, to ask her to wait for him. She'll probably be surprised. Maybe even scared. But Brandon will explain everything to her, and Shara will understand. As an artist, Brandon was a very sensitive person and understood perfectly well that he and Shara were made for each other, as if they were halves of one whole. The damn window wouldn't open. The handle was jammed. Had this happened before? Or was I pulling it in a futile attempt to deal with the broken mechanism? It was no use. Meanwhile, Shara was getting farther and farther away. Judging by her trajectory, she was heading for the patio. That's where the windows from the other room looked out. Brandon rushed into the bedroom, opened the window, and leaned out through the waist-high window, looking for the girl. She was about to appear. But Shara didn't enter the courtyard. He saw her disappear into the arches of the artist's arch. It was a special place. The walls of the arch from the ground to the ceiling were painted by artists. Local and visiting painters left their mark here, painting what they liked most of all: animals, people, heroes of movies and cartoons, memorable places of the city, anything. The arch was mesmerizing, attracting, holding. Shara would surely spend a lot of time there, as would everyone who found themselves under its arches. Brandon would make it in time, make it to her in time for sure. What luck. The young man's heart was pounding. Would he look into the eyes of the one he had dreamed of for so long? The Arcade Pirelli's creations, among others. He drew her beautiful Shara there too. How could he not? Since the young man first saw the beauty, she often became the heroine of his paintings. On the wall of the arch, Brandon painted the surface of the moon and Shara dancing on it. Maybe the girl will even find her portrait. And if she doesn't, Brandon will show it to her. They were about to meet. Luck seemed to favor the young man as he sprinted out onto the landing. The elevator had just arrived on his floor. A neighbor stepped out and raised his eyebrows in surprise at the sight of the troubled young man. Brandon's hands were smeared with paint, as was his long apron, which he had forgotten to take off in his haste. Yes, he must have been a sight to behold. But Brandon didn't care about that right now. He was in a hurry to get to Shara. The guy slid into the elevator car and pressed the first floor button with force. The doors closed. The elevator rushed down. Suddenly, it stopped abruptly. The car stopped between floors, frozen. In desperation, Brandon began to press all the buttons, but in vain. A moment later, the lights went out. The elevator was stuck. It had happened before in their entryway. But why now? Why was it happening now? Brandon called the dispatchers. Fortunately, his cell phone was in his apron pocket. Help showed up relatively quickly in about 20 minutes. That time seemed like an eternity to Brandon. He wanted to smash through the walls of the elevator and rush to Shara. She was right there, only 100 meters away. Her helplessness raced into despair, but hope was also present. This could very well happen. Shara lingered in the archway, waiting for him. When Brandon was finally released, he immediately rushed into the street. His path lay toward the archway. Someone was there. Someone was sure to be the lad heard voices. Indeed, in the archway the guy caught a glimpse of people looking around in surprise, 2 guys and a girl. Shara was not among them. Disappointment, sadness, pain. Brandon was hit with a whole gamut of feelings. How could this be? He walked over to the wall where he had once painted Shara dancing on the moon, and saw the inscription that she had no doubt left behind. Shara had written that she had seen his paintings and that she thought they were very beautiful, but the girl had also informed the guy that she wasn't like that at all. Not the way he imagines her to be. Brendan felt himself thrown into a fever. Shara had left him a message. She knew Brendan would read it. She might come here again, or she might not. Either way, any opportunity to communicate with her should be taken. Guy pulled a black graffiti pencil out of his apron pocket and made an inscription below the one Shara had left. He didn't even think about the content of the message. The right words were born in his head by themselves. You're the most beautiful girl in the world. The embankment under the old bridge. Shara will find this place, she will. And that's where Brandon will leave another message for her. Without putting the matter off, the boy returned home, took paints, brushes, changed his clothes, and went to the embankment under the old bridge. It was a quiet, deserted place. It was here, on the concrete wall, that Brandon would write a message for Shara. Or rather, he'd draw it. It's what he does best. All the more so because some unknown force was already pulling him by the hand to the wall, forcing him to create, to work, to draw. Brandon took on the task with passion. He drew the central town square, the fountain, the pyramidal poplars, the clock tower with a clock on the face. He marked the correct time. Then Brandon drew a bench, exactly like the one that stood near the fountain in that very park. And on it, on this very bench, the artist drew a girl. She sat half turned toward the audience, head slightly down, cell phone in hand. It was Shara, dressed exactly as she was today. Jeans, sneakers, gray t-shirt. If she saw it, of course she would understand everything, but to outsiders the work would remain just a beautiful and realistic picture. Shara will understand. If she wants to, she'll come to the park at 6 o'clock at night. And he, Brandon, would wait for her there every day from now on. Back home, Shara took a bath, warmed up dinner, and turned on her favorite TV series. The events unfolding on the screen did not occupy the girl much. She was thinking about what she saw today, that mysterious artist Brandon. He drew her again and again in the image of a beautiful girl, not just a girl, almost a sky dweller. That must be how he sees her. It's a big mistake. The guy is clearly in love with her, and, like every lover, idealizes the girl. The artist sees her through some very different eyes. How fortunate that they are strangers in reality. Otherwise this man would be disappointed. Apparently he is very young and inexperienced, since he doesn't understand who she is. And she seems to be David's soon-to-be mistress. And Shara realizes that it won't be for long. It'll be a while before David finds someone else younger, more interesting, but she's still okay with this relationship. Why? But probably she wants to feel dear to someone for a while. And David, he knows how to court. Next to him you feel unique, special, and the only one. So what if it's all just an illusion? It doesn't matter. The upcoming trip is the step that separates Shara from giving up on David. And she's ready to take it, was ready. The girl had already decided everything for herself, but then suddenly there was this picture in the archway. A mysterious unknown artist was trying to tell her that she was beautiful and worthy of true love. And it was at this turning point that this image caught her eye. When she saw herself in this image, she doubted again, doubted that she was doing the right thing. David's married. He'd already had an army of them like Shara. And how many more were to come? Maybe I should just say no to David. But the tickets are already bought, the hotel's booked. Perhaps it was too late, she should have thought of it sooner. Shara decided that tomorrow night after the exam she would go to the archway again and look at her portrait. And there, on that wonderful spot, she would make her final decision. The following evening, Shara stood in the archway again. This is a completely unique place after all. Even the atmosphere is special. And here's her portrait. But what is it? There was a new inscription underneath it. It must have been left by the artist. Or not. Maybe someone was just kidding. That's also possible. There's a lot of people here every day. Brandon, if it was really him, asked Shara to go down under the old bridge. This was already resembling a quest, and Shara just couldn't help but go there. The girl, trying not to change from a quick step to a run, went to the old bridge. It was at the other end of the embankment. It was a long walk, and Shara couldn't wait to get there. Suddenly under the bridge there was a solution to all her problems, a way out of the difficult situation she was in, even salvation. The passers-by looked at the pretty girl in a hurry. Shara realized she looked a little strange, upset, anxious. Her cheeks were burning, her face was hot, but her palms and feet, on the contrary, were very cold, and she was afraid that she wouldn't find anything under the bridge. Shara had put too much hope in this place, on the painting. Barely under the bridge, Shara saw it immediately and exhaled with relief. That inscription, it wasn't a joke, it wasn't a hoax. She had indeed been left by the artist, and he had also painted a new picture for her. This time it was big, the whole wall. The paint was still freshly painted, and he must have finished it recently. Shara already recognized the young man's handwork in his own special way. Realistic images emerged from his brush, as if a glow was emanating from them. Amazing talent. This time Brandon painted the central square. Shara recognized the fountain, the clock tower, the trees. How does this guy manage to achieve such realism? Shara could even see Edith's glare on the beady black eyes of the sparrows scampering by the fountain. And sure enough, Shara saw herself. She was wearing the same jeans and t-shirt as yesterday, so that meant Brandon had seen her. But why hadn't he come over? Didn't dare. Poor guy thinks she's some kind of goddess, but she's just an ordinary girl who's willing to be a rich man's mistress for the sake of a good life. Yeah, it's going to be hard for her to accept David's game after all this. I wonder what Brandon wanted to say with this painting. This time the guy didn't sign anything. But Shara realized that the plot was chosen for a reason. It contained some secret meaning. And then her gaze fell on the dial adorning the tower. 6 p.m. Could it be that Brandon was asking her to be at the park at 6 p.m.? But what day? Shara searched the painting with her eyes for any clue and found none. Saw only the time and nothing else. The girl glanced at her watch. Just in time to get to the square by the right hour. If she took her time. Or should she just give up and go home? It's time to pack. The flight's the day after tomorrow. Shara had never been abroad before. She's never even seen our sea. She's going on a wonderful vacation at an expensive resort. David won't deny her anything. She'll feel like a real princess, even if only for a while. But how to give up this fairy tale that appeared in her life recently and changed her so much? Shara realized she probably wouldn't find Brandon in the park. But there was still a chance, albeit a small one. And this guy, this young artist that Shara had never seen in her life, she cared about him. The girl wanted to know what he looked like, to hear his voice, to feel all the love he expressed for her through these paintings. Shara arrived at the square even before the appointed time. She couldn't walk slowly, her feet carried her forward. Here was the bench from the painting. Shara sat down on it. There it is, the clock tower, people all around. But none of them fit the role of an artist in love. Women with 2 babies. Men with a newspaper. 2 old men playing chess on a bench opposite a flock of boys splashing self-consciously in the fountain. Red-haired girl with a book. Shara sighed heavily. Obviously no miracle was going to happen. That was fine. She'll sit here a little longer and then go home. She had a lot of things to do. Things to pack. Call David. And then she saw him. It was definitely him, a tall, slender young man, walking straight to her bench from the fountain and smiling. He was looking right at her, keeping his eyes on the girl. The guy seemed a little embarrassed, but tried to hide it. "We finally met," he said as he hugged Shara. Nice voice, quiet and a little lulling. The girl was unable to tear her gaze away from his eyes framed by long lashes. The guy was clearly over-embarrassed, and it looked really cute. "My name is Brandon. I know that's all I know about you, and that you have an apartment on the waterfront," the old lady said. Looking into his eyes, Shara realized that she wasn't going anywhere with David. She was staying here, with Brandon.